If anyone would like to speak during public comment period, please fill out a speaker card by the door and turn them in to me, please. Thank you.
Really, good job.
Okay. I guess we'll get started. I'm going to call to order this meeting of the Albany City Council for Monday, March 2nd. And thank you to the Youth and Government youth who showed up and toured the City Hall and Fire Department, Police Department, and who broke bread with us. And good to see you here. And now we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance. And can I ask Councilmember Moss to lead us?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Barnes?
Here.
Councilmember Moss?
Here.
Councilmember Nason?
Here.
Vice Mayor McQuay? Here. Mayor Pilch?
Here. I'm going to take a moment now before we begin the ceremonial matters to discuss something that's in the news, and it's not the election tomorrow, it's the coronavirus, otherwise known more formally as the novel coronavirus or COVID-19, which is the illness it produces. We usually have the most number of people here, so I just wanted to just disseminate a little bit of information. I've been in touch with the Albany City staff. We are on heightened alert in case we need to take any action. None required at the city in this time. The Alameda County Department of Public Health and the State Department of Public Health and the CDC are taking the lead on this issue, and Alameda County Health is taking the lead in this area. Two websites to go for information are CDC, Center for Disease Control.org, cdc.org, and the Alameda County one is a little hard to remember. It's Alameda County Department of Public Health, acdph.org. Both have the updated information on the coronavirus. The situation is evolving, so do stay informed. I put together some statistics, but I threw them out today as I realized the ones that I gathered last night had already changed today. We are expecting more cases here and nationwide. We do have one case at least one case in Alameda County of a healthcare worker who was presumably infected in Solano County and who is isolated at home in Alameda County now. You should know that patients with confirmed COVID-19 infection have experienced mild to severe respiratory illness with symptoms such as fever, cough, and shortness of breath. Similar to influenza, it appears to cause less severe illness in younger people. Good for you folks. Those with more severe impacts tend to be older, medically fragile individuals with underlying medical conditions. Alameda County has declared a state of public health emergency in its ongoing response. Alameda County and Solano County residents, all residents, should take precautions to stop the spread of germs to prevent respiratory illness. Wash hands with soap and water, cover your mouth and nose, refrain from touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. I think this is one of the most important things. And if you get a flu shot, it is said here, the people who are well and healthy do not need to use a face mask to protect themselves from respiratory illness. A face mask can be worn for those who are coughing or sneezing to protect others from getting sick. The use of face masks is crucial, however, for health workers and other people who are taking care of someone infected with COVID-19 in close settings. In addition to staying home when you're sick, if you do feel like you have flu-like symptoms, call your healthcare provider to get more professional advice. And healthy people should not be excluded from any activities based on their race or country of origin. This is very important. There's no racial, ethnic, or cultural basis for the disease. And as I mentioned, cdc.org and acphd.org are places to go for more information. So now that I've got that over with, on to better matters. We have, under ceremonial matters, the first proclamation, the California YMCA Youth and Government Albany Delegation Program. Vice Mayor McQuaid is going to read the proclamation we have, and I understand we have a few representatives who are going to join her at the podium.
First of all, I want to thank you all for coming this evening. It's been a real pleasure spending a couple of hours with you. I also want to thank all of the city staff who were so gracious in giving their time to tour you through the facilities and talk to you about all of the various departments. City of Albany Proclamation. In recognition of the California YMCA Youth and Government Albany Delegation Program. Whereas for 72 years, the California YMCA Youth and Government has provided programs that have positively affected the lives of more than 100,000 youth. And whereas youth participating in this program have become both corporate and civic leaders, and whereas California YMCA Youth and Government brings 4,000 high school students together to learn and act on issues affecting their communities, state, and nation, and whereas youth and government participants develop critical thinking, public speaking, and leadership skills that will prepare them for college and beyond, and whereas youth in government provides participants with the opportunity to experience government firsthand and to learn how to solve community problems through the democratic process, as well as debate and discuss issues with their peers from throughout California. And whereas youth in government provides a platform for young people to find their voice and to use it to advocate for positive change in matters that impact their lives and those around them. And whereas youth in government, using a youth-run, youth-led model, provides a learn-by-doing experience that teaches the values of democracy by bringing together a diverse group of high school students from across California. And whereas countless volunteers dedicate thousands of hours to support youth and government participants, and whereas Albany has had a vibrant youth and government delegation for 30 years with over 1,000 participants, including Spencer Perry, the 65th youth governor, now therefore be it proclaimed that the Albany City Council recognizes the contributions of the Youth and Government Program and wishes the participants well as our future leaders. Nick Pilch, Mayor. You want to say something real quick?
One of you? Sure, I'll say something.
Okay, great.
Oh, yeah. Well, I would just like to thank the mayor, vice mayor, and everyone who has given us a really wonderful tour today. And I know I've had a really positive and informative experience here. And I think we all agree on like the tremendous value of, youth participation and youth empowerment. And I think you guys have really helped elevate us and feel us valued in the community. And this means a lot. And I think it's a great start of a tradition. Yeah, so thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, next on the agenda, we have a proclamation for Red Cross Month 2020. And I believe Councilmember Moss is going to present. And we have representatives to receive. Thank you.
Okay. City of Albany Proclamation in honor of American Red Cross Month 2020. Whereas the American Red Cross Bay Area was founded in 1898, and whereas the American Red Cross, a leading voluntary agency chartered and authorized by Congress to act in times of need, provides compassionate assistance to people afflicted by personal, local, and national disasters, and whereas the lifeblood of the American Red Cross is its volunteers, and whereas the American Red Cross helped 1,563 families with temporary housing, clothing, food, and mental health counseling during 824 local disasters last year alone. And whereas people have counted on the Red Cross for the information and skills they need to be safe at home, at work, at school, and at play, and last year the American Red Cross trained 93,183 people in life-saving CPR, first aid, and water safety. And whereas through the Pillowcase Project and the Home Fires Campaign, 20,629 local individuals and families received fire prevention training, supplies, and/or smoke alarms. And whereas the Red Cross staff deployed with the U.S. military to provide emergency communications, counseling, financial assistance, and a caring presence to 12,453 local military families. And whereas American Red Cross Blood Services supports Bay Area hospitals, providing them with more than 74,228 units of red cells, platelets, and plasma in 2019 to patients in need. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Albany City Council does hereby proclaim the month of March 2020 as American Red Cross Month in the City of Albany in support of all those who support the American Red Cross mission to prevent and alleviate human suffering in the face of emergencies. Signed by Mayor Nick Pilch.
Hi, I'm Cortese Saunders of the American Red Cross Leadership Council for Alameda County, and I have some fellow colleagues up here, but I actually also want to ask if we can just invite up one of our key partners, which is the fire department, and I know we have a representative from the fire department, and thank you. Tim, just join us because we do so much together. With me is Ed Silva. Ed Silva is our DAT team. A DAT team member is a disaster action team member. He's known throughout Alameda County and the Bay Area because the fire department, when they have an incident where they need to have the Red Cross come out and help support them, they're getting in contact with someone, which is Ed Silva, to coordinate for Red Cross to come out, and we have volunteers, and he's a key coordinator of that and just known within the fire departments, the police departments, and so forth. So I'm so glad Ed is just here today for this proclamation, and also someone that you see with me each year when I come out, and that is kind of my partner, Madeline Biscatui, who is a volunteer, does a lot of our government relations, and I know she's had a job change, but all of us are here to really thank the city for your support, because what the Red Cross does really cannot be done without the support of leaders and without the support of our incredible volunteers. And although our proclamation talks about what we do kind of big scale, I've always come here to bring it home in terms of what we do locally. And locally, there are volunteers within the city of Albany that come and step forward and participate in disasters, whether they are multi-state disasters that occur or just local disasters within our community and within our neighborhoods. And one of the key things that I think all of us need to just be mindful of is that one of the Red Cross services, though, is blood donors. And there is always a need for blood. And no drug manufacturer has yet been able to manufacture blood. So it is donors, like people around the table that are on the video, listening and looking in, that are giving blood. And the American Red Cross and the American Cancer Society have joined together to encourage people to give blood to cancer victims and others. So we thank you so much, and we just ask for your continued support. We ask for people to volunteer, take a class, CPR, AED. The Red Cross is here, and we want and encourage you all for us to be together even more so. So thank you so much for this proclamation.
Thank you. And quick question, do you have
Yes.
to be 18 to give blood, or?
Is it 18? No, that's right. Do you
Sorry.
want to answer?
No, I don't know.
Okay.
16? Ah, okay. Opportunity to go out there.
Okay. If it's 16, I bet there's some 16-year-olds here. Huh? Okay, good. Could we get a photo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to stand with the whole council
Yes,
up here?
Well, while they're getting organized, let me remind you, there's a blood drive tomorrow in Albany at the community center from 9:30 to 3.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Vice Mayor.
Yeah, and I'll stand back here.
Stand up again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, moving on to report on action taken in closed session, if any.
Oh, one more.
Oh, I am very sorry. Proclamation 3-3, March for Meals Month 2020, and Councilmember Nason is going to present.
We have March for Meals rep.
We do have someone. Hello. How you doing? Good. How are you? All right. This is a City of Albany proclamation in honor of March 2020 as the 18th annual March for Meals Month. Whereas on March 22, 1972, President Richard Nixon signed into law a measure that amended the Older Americans Act of 1965 and established a national nutrition program for seniors 60 years and older. And whereas Meals on Wheels America established the March for Meals campaign in March 2002 to recognize the historic month, the importance of the Older Americans Act nutrition programs, both congregate and home delivered, and to raise awareness about the escalating problem of senior hunger in America. And whereas the 2020 observance of March for Meals celebrates 18 years of providing an opportunity to support Meals on Wheels programs that deliver vital and critical services by donating, volunteering, and raising awareness about senior hunger and isolation. And whereas Meals on Wheels programs, both congregate and home delivered, have served our communities admirably for more than 40 years in California and over 35 years in Albany. And whereas Volunteers for Meals on Wheels program in Albany are the backbone of the program, and they not only deliver nutritious meals to seniors and individuals with disabilities who are at significant risk of hunger and isolation, but also caring concern and attention to their welfare. And whereas Meals on Wheels program in Albany provide nutritious meals to seniors throughout the city that help them maintain their health and independence, thereby preventing unnecessary falls, hospitalizations, or premature institutionalization. And whereas Meals on Wheels of Alameda County's program in Albany provide powerful socialization opportunity for millions of seniors to help combat the negative health effects and economic consequences of loneliness and isolation. And whereas Tri-City Meals on Wheels in Albany, Berkeley, and Emeryville deserves recognition for the contributions they have made and will continue to make to local communities, our state, and our nation. Now, therefore, the Albany City Council does hereby proclaim March 2020 as the 18th annual March for Meals Month and urges every citizen to take this month to honor Meals on Wheels of Alameda County programs, the seniors they serve, and the volunteers who care for them. Our recognition of and involvement in the National 2020 March for Meals can enrich our entire community and help combat senior hunger and isolation in America. Signed by Nick Pilch, our mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to say anything?
Absolutely. Good evening. Oh, thank you. My name is Marissa Mello, and I'm the Meals on Wheels of Alameda County Executive Director. And I just want to invite all of you to come and deliver a meal. It takes about an hour to deliver about 10 meals, get to meet folks who are in the community who can't come to a city council meeting. It's a great experience. So I invite you to come and participate through March 16th through the 20th during Champions Week. You all should have received an invitation in the mail, 2 invitations actually. So hopefully we can see you out there. I just want to also reiterate that loneliness is akin to 15 cigarettes a day, smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And our Meals on Wheels clients, without Meals on Wheels, the majority of them wouldn't see another human being for days or weeks on end, which to me is a tragedy in itself. So we really appreciate your continued support for Meals on Wheels, and we look forward to continuing our partnership with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, that does conclude our ceremonial matters and proclamations. We had no closed session, so we'll skip over item 4, and we're on to item 5, consent calendar, which is considered routine and will be enacted by one motion. There'll be no separate discussion unless a council member or member of the public requests removal of an item from the consent calendar. Does any member of the public wish to remove an item? Any council members? I do wish to remove item 5.5 and item 5.6. And I'll just go ahead with item 5.5. So the I have an interest in this item in that it concerns the possible or the purchase of a hybrid vehicle and possible consideration of purchase of an electric vehicle for the traffic control. I did have some back and forth with the staff about this, and I understand that we're purchasing just the one hybrid vehicle because we want to make sure that that technology is going to be work well in patrol cars before we can commit to purchasing others with hybrid technology. And I understand that the vehicle, there was some research done that indicated that other jurisdictions had problems with this electric version of the vehicle as opposed to the gas version. The perfectly valid. I just hope we're not considering the hybrid technologies and electric technologies as being cutting-edge technologies. The first hybrid commercial vehicle, the Prius, came out in 1997, so that's over 20 years old, that hybrid technology, and it's very well proven. And the plug-in technology has been around for quite some time, and I myself have driven a plug-in vehicle for 5 years, and know others that do, and that technology seems very stable. Now, it could very well be in these alternative vehicles, they're not quite there as opposed to these specialized vehicles. But I just want to make sure that we're not considering this cutting-edge technology and that we are mindful of the fact that using hybrid and plug-in vehicles will go far towards reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and making a statement about how the city is committed to reducing pollution from fossil fuels. So I would just ask you to keep that in mind going forward, and that's the only thing I wanted to say about 5.5. Any other comments from council members about 5.5? Seeing none, 5.6. As I read through the sign ordinance, I didn't have an issue with this sign ordinance coming before us for a second time, but and I'm not sure that I was able to read your email about this, Nicole, but I believe you said that, so I noted that we have a restriction on the size of one commercial sign, one non-commercial sign in private property, but no restriction on the number of signs in private property. Was that correct? So I just wondered if the rest of the council caught that, and if they're okay with that, or if we want to consider restricting the number of signs as well as the size of one particular sign. We can certainly always come back and consider it at another time, but it hadn't been something that I'd been considering in my prior deliberations.
I thought we talked about it.
The number of signs?
Yeah, that there was a constitutional issue. We looked at a constitutional.
I don't think so. For the number of signs, there's no issue restricting the number of signs, is there? Or is there?
I think the concern was that in a season like this, where there could be numerous issues that you may want to support or not support, that the more signage that you had, and I think the last discussion, there were some issues that are ongoing that you might want to have a sign up for, and then as you can imagine, during election season, you may want to have signs up for that. So I think that was where some of the discussion was going, is that there was probably much speech that we wanted to encompass, and so we didn't want to have a limit on the number of signs.
Okay, I do remember that discussion a little bit, and I didn't realize that was addressing the fact that we will have no limits on the number of signs. But if that's the council's pleasure, I'm fine with that. Okay. Yes.
So I move the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, consent calendar moved in second. Roll call, please.
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor McQuaid?
Yes.
Mayor Pilch?
Yes.
The motion
you.
carries.
Thank you. We'll move on to item 6, which is go to the city public comment for persons desiring to address the city council on an item that is not on the agenda. Does usually we limit the speakers up to 3 minutes. Does anyone from the public wish to speak on an item that's not on the agenda? Seeing none, I'll move right along to item 7, which is council subcommittee reports and member reports on appointed representation in other meetings. Any subcommittees reporting tonight?
Well, the cannabis.
Cannabis, but that is
The
another
cannabis,
agenda item as well,
yeah.
so
Right.
we can save it for that. Who would like to report on meetings attended as an appointed representative?
Well, I mean, isn't cannabis the first one?
Cannabis
That's
is
what
the
that
first
is.
thing on that list.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought it was under a different item. My bad. Okay, so we'll discuss that and then move on to the appointed and other meetings. Okay, got it. All right, well, then we have the presentation of 7.1A, which is the memo that Councilmember Moss and I did on possible cannabis policy, as well as a table of what other jurisdictions have done in terms of taxation on cannabis. Note that right before the meeting, we were trying to gather information about El Cerrito. I think we gathered information, although it was quite surprising that no one in El Cerrito and some of the electeds did not seem to know. But the information I got was that, oh, and perhaps staff has some information on that, or no?
I can provide you with a status update.
On El Cerrito?
Yeah, so they are authorized, they obviously have an ordinance that allows cannabis activities. There is one that has been permitted. However, I understand the construction on that project stalled out, and that's due in part to the applicant not having a sufficient amount of capital at this time to complete the project.
Okay, thank you. And the information I gathered on the taxation rate was that there was no taxation rate set yet in El Cerrito?
Extra taxation.
Extra, city taxation, but that the city was asking the applicants to provide a benefit.
City amenity.
A city amenity
Right.
as part of their application. So that's the extra information about El Cerrito. So did staff have any presentation, or is this on us?
I think
Okay.
it's on us. Yeah.
All right, Councilmember Moss, since you prepared the bulk of this, would you like to
Sure.
present?
Okay, so this is something that Nick and I talked about after our last cannabis presentation, which was in September, I believe, of last year. That presentation was something that at the time was probably as much information was available on this topic. It was, but most of the attachments on it were attachments on newspaper articles from the New York Times and the LA Times describing how limited the tax revenue had been, and it not met expectations. So it was sort of my idea that we should investigate a little further and see what some of the cities that were mentioned in that report were doing and how taxes had gone. So I went out to 3 different cities that were in that. I think Berkeley was also mentioned in that, but I took the 3 cities that I thought were closest to Albany in terms of either size or well, I went to San Leandro, which is much bigger than Albany, but I grew up in San Leandro, and I'm down there a lot, so it was very easy to go into San Leandro City Hall and talk with their staff. And they were in different states. So the first one I went to was El Cerrito, and as Ann said, they're sort of in limbo land. I went out to the site where they are trying to do a cannabis operation, and it's an abandoned construction project, basically. I heard different stories, but one was that they had gotten into it with the building inspector, and the building inspector had told them what they were doing was inadequate, and it looked like nothing had happened there since maybe last October. I then went to San Leandro, and I spoke with a member of the San Leandro city manager staff, and they had permitted, were permitting at least 2 cannabis, and one was in process, or had been slowly in process of opening up. And I got information on the tax revenue that they had provided. So far for the first, second, and third quarter of 2019, not fiscal year, but quarters of 2019, they had gotten $135,000, almost $136,000. And then finally I went to Emeryville, and I spoke with Emeryville, and I think they're sort of the most advanced along the path of getting something going. They had permitted in their ordinance 2 potential dispensaries. Only one had opened up. This was both medical and recreational cannabis. And the city had received $251,712 in 2018-19, and I think so far this year, I'm misreading my own report here, but approximately 325,000, I guess, overall, including the first couple months of this year. They were on track to essentially make perhaps over 600,000 in Emeryville. So what I learned from talking with all the different staff is that none of the staff that I talked to thought this was too overwhelming. They had been able to deal with it. They all felt they had good programs in place. They had, the police were involved. They would do a, what's it called here? A live scan. Applicants submit to live scan process for police background checks. I think something like that's also going on in Emeryville and San Leandro. And so every year, all the participants, all the people that are in sales there have to be looked at. So far, they'd had no problems particularly, and the revenues seem to be increasing. So I think I know there's a number of different opinions on the dais here about cannabis as something that should we be involved in. But I find it very difficult not to at least consider this because I think there is some tax revenues that might be worth trying to explore. This was a sheet that was used in the San Leandro City Council as to what different cities around here were doing in terms of percentage that they were adding on to the 15% state tax. But as I said, I only went and talked to San Leandro, El Cerrito, and Emeryville. The planning and zoning had, had requested they be able to put together something for an ordinance allowing this in Albany, and I'd like to recommend that we think that we give them that direction. So that's sort of the basis right there. I'd be happy to hear what others think.
Okay. Are any questions from the council members first? This item, I want to.
Yeah, did you look at any of the close by ones? We've got 7 stars on Pierce and
I did not go to Richmond and
Berkeley.
I only went to the ones that had been in the original report, and I excluded Berkeley. And certainly there is cannabis dispensaries happening in Richmond, very close to Albany. There'll be one in San Pablo, close to Albany. There's stuff in Berkeley, Emeryville, Oakland. It's sort of happening in all the municipalities. There are cities that adjoin Albany, except for Kensington. So it's not like if we do this, it would be a service to Albany citizens to be able to buy cannabis more easily. That's easy enough to do. Anybody who's an adult can do that. It's strictly, my point of view, is potential tax revenues.
Are you recommending on-site consumption as Berkeley is having?
They're doing that in Emeryville, and I think Berkeley is now going to start doing that. I hadn't really thought about it. I don't necessarily think that mean. I was happy to, when this first came up, when in 2017, I guess. 4 of us voted not to allow commercial cannabis, and I was one of those 4 because I thought it was too new and there wasn't any data as to how well this was going to work. But now I think there is data. There isn't, as far as I can see, a lot of data on-site use. So I personally think maybe we shouldn't go there. The one opinion that I got from a woman, the planner in Emeryville, was that were allowing just about everything except cultivation, which she thought might be very problematic in terms of control. But otherwise, everything else seemed to be well under control.
Any other questions?
Yeah, did someone on Planning and Zoning make a formal request to us to review this again?
The Planning and Zoning Commission had originally asked.
But was this recently, or the one,
No,
because we went through this several months ago?
Last July. And
The Planning Commission received an informational report July 24th of last year and said that if the council were to give direction, they would be happy to look into the matter further. But they recognize that the underlying consideration would be the council direction in terms of if something moves forward.
I want to add that we also did meet with a former resident of Albany, actually a graduate of Albany High, who was talking to us about possible business opportunities in the city. We didn't give that a lot of weight since it was more of a businessman pitching, but he did indicate that if we included retail and distribution, maybe one other thing, at least.
it was probably manufacturing.
Manufacturing.
Yeah.
That the revenues could be quite significant. I don't even want to give the numbers because, again, it was probably more of a pitch, but.
Yeah, I had that discussion with that guy, and it's like a lot of pitches. I don't put much weight in them. So, and looking back on the notes I took, he didn't even talk about what that tax rate would be that would give us this, $1 million a year or something.
Yeah.
So,
But it was a person from Albany who was sincerely interested in doing business here, and also brought up the other uses, the other other opportunities for taxation, such as distribution, manufacturing. Any other questions? I want to see if there's any public.
Yeah, I have a whole list of questions.
Okay.
And I guess the first one is a process question. If we're going to send this to planning and zoning, I think we need to be really specific in what we're asking them to explore. So we need to I think we need to have a fairly good understanding of that. And I guess the question is, what do we want to consider before we send it to them? And how are we going to gather this information? Who's actually going to do all the research? It seems like it's probably going to have to fall on staff. And while I hear what you say about other city staffs, when I look at our bare bones staff, I wonder how much more bandwidth they have to be really researching this. So I'd like to have us really consider that piece of it. And I think we need to really give them direction as to where, if we're going to do this, where are we going to put it? And what is that, when we determine that, what is that really saying about us? And I think that's a discussion that we would need to have. What about quality control? Who does that? It's, you can tell I'm not really in favor of this. So I'm trying to get all of the pieces together that we need to understand before we move this forward. The other thing that always concerns me about this business is it's not a very green business. And I've read a lot of stuff that it's getting better, but it's still high on electricity, it's high on water use. Is it really getting better?
Could we stick to questions first?
That was a question. Is it high on water use? Is it high on electricity?
well, I think if cultivation is part of the mix, yes. And as far as my quick summary of everything I looked at is that cultivation would be a mistake. I think it's more problematic, and the very concerns you're mentioning about water use, energy use, I think, to my mind, we shouldn't go there. I think the big question, though, that was your first one was about staff resources. And yes, this will take some staff resources, no doubt about it. And I know staff has got lots of things on their plate, and I hate to, say, well, we should definitely do this also. But the ultimate consideration is potential revenues, because I think there's not often something that comes along for cities from which they can get new revenues. We did it a few years ago with the soda tax, And although I never looked at that as a revenue generator, it was more of a statement on health, which I was happy to back. But this is one that seems like a significant amount of money. And we certainly all have ideas about different things we want to spend a significant amount of money on. So, could this be, one thing that I think some cities do is they actually hire consultants to put this together for them. So it doesn't necessarily have to be our staff time to do it. But essentially, we could be just taking, look at what El Cerrito has in their ordinance, look at San Leandro, look at Emeryville. You could put all the different ordinances of a half a dozen cities up there. And, if planning and zoning isn't so busy, the commission itself could kind of thumb through all those and come up with some ideas. I personally have some ideas about if we're going to do this, where should we do it? From my experience, when we allowed medical, nobody wanted it anywhere near their house, and so it never happened. Probably the best place would be either on the Eastshore Highway, Target commercial strip down there, or on the commercial part of Cleveland. And I don't even know if there's a space that a landlord would rent, and if there isn't, well, that's the end of the story. But it's far enough away from all residential that I don't think it would, the issues that came up under medical marijuana would come up.
I have some thoughts about that, but I'm holding them for comment period. I do have one other question, though, as we're looking at this, that the majority of cities in California do not allow cannabis, and I think we need to explore why that is. Why is it? And I think that's all my questions till we talk some more.
Okay.
I have one other question on the consulting that was done with the staff. As I recall, our decision was based pretty heavily on the perception that our police chief at that time, Chief McQuiston, was not enthusiastic about seeing that come into town. Have you spoken with the police chiefs of San Leandro and Emeryville and El Cerrito?
I did not, but I was told that the police departments in San Leandro and Emeryville were not excited about it either. But those councils went ahead and did it. I don't know what the story is in El Cerrito. I didn't ask that question. But I think in general, most police departments, it is another thing that adds to their workload, and I recognize that. But the feedback I was getting was it didn't add that much, and that most of the dispensary operators usually bend over backwards the police because their licenses are so tenuous that there's so much control on them, they don't go out of the way to cause any problems. So,
Did you ask Chief Geisberger his thoughts?
I did not. I thought I'd bring it up to council, and I would hope that the chief is here still.
No, unfortunately, he left.
He left.
No.
Well, we should get them, for sure. But
yeah, one thing, Councilmember Moss and I discussed this, and we discussed talking to the police chief, and there's a lot of other people around town I wanted to talk to. I think Councilmember Moss wanted to bring it forward more quickly, and so I didn't have a chance to do that. But I would love to have a chance to do that and to do more research as well. I just want to pause here and see if there's any member of the public who wanted to speak on this item. Yes, please come on up.
Hello, my name is Michael. I'm a new resident of Albany. I wasn't here for the entire discussion, so I want to apologize if I make a comment on something that you already talked about or wasn't covered. But I think if there's an issue with what the police is concerned about with people having marijuana use in the city, I think that's like a non-question. What's the issue with people using weed? There's more people are dying from alcohol, consumption and alcohol being used while driving in the city probably than marijuana is. And I just think the police's opinion on this doesn't need to really be considered. Because if there's any issues about like enforcement or whatever, just don't enforce it, simple enough, then there's no more workload for the police. And I also think it's important to consider when having marijuana businesses in the city is that whatever regulation gets adopted by the council or by anybody else, I think you all, there needs to be some kind of due diligence on behalf of the council to assure that whoever's getting permits and whoever's going to be making money off this are the communities that have been hurt by the war on drugs and who have been, suffering from incarceration and ticketing and all kinds of punitive measures that have been taken by cities all across the Bay and the country. And, that needs to be a part of this entire discussion, aside from just taxes and how to enforce all of this stuff, because that's a very important part of this consideration, whatever it is. Thank you.
Thank you. Please come on up.
Buddy Akasich, a resident of El Cerrito and active in the city of El Cerrito's political dialogue. It came up in the Human Relations meeting that I attended last week about the possibility of cannabis businesses coming to El Cerrito, and the comment was that it was on hold. Some issues hadn't been fully resolved. But the discussion about the police department and what the police department's attitude and position is on marijuana dispensaries, I happen to have the chief of police of El Cerrito, Chief Paul Keith, in a seminar setting at 2 o'clock this Wednesday. I want to invite each of you to bring your questions. That's Hana Garden Senior Center, 2 o'clock Wednesday. Paul Keith, Chief of Police. You're invited. Thank you.
I'm sorry, could you tell me again where it is?
Hana Gardens Senior Center.
Okay, thank you.
10870 San Pablo Avenue. If you can find the City Hall, it's right across the alley from the City Hall.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to see you there.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Janelle Gary. I'm going to disagree about the police, that they do need to get involved, especially if we're talking about putting a dispensary by Target and on Cleveland. The highway's right there. You might be bringing more crime in. So that's something we really need to take in consideration. So we do need to make sure we're doing adequate research. As far as tax revenue, you talked about Councilmember Moss. We need to strategically set up a plan on where those revenues, what it would help with infrastructure or whatever the case may be. If we decide to do that, we need to have a plan laid out on where monies will be spent to help build the city. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing none, let me bring the discussion back to council. Councilmember Barnes.
Well, we have been through this before, and I remember that it worked. It came up that there was a rule about no marijuana dispensaries within 500 or 1,000 feet of schools or public buildings, and someone finally drew all the circles and realized there was virtually nowhere in Albany that you could have a dispensary. So I don't want to reinvent that wheel. If we go forward with this discussion, and as a science writer, you're probably not surprised that I dug through the recent science literature, and the scientific literature on how damaging marijuana is for young people's brains is very ambiguous and understudied. And given that, probably the export we're most best known for is our children and our, well-educated children. And given the first time around, it was upset parents who were leading the charge against having a medical marijuana dispensary, if we're going to go down this path, and frankly, I'm not sure it's worth the bother, I'd probably vote no. We need to make sure that to reach out to parents in the schools and make sure they have the up-to-date literature on the safety effects for their kids of smoking marijuana, or remember, juuling it, which killed several people in this country, or juuling nicotine, which became a huge problem. So I'm like, you know, what could go wrong? A lot of things could go wrong. So we do not want to be in the position of more and more information coming out that how this is not good for kids, and then having parents come after us 6 months from now saying, you blindsided us. So they've got to be in on this from the get-go. You know, as far as it being a net revenue benefit for the city, I'm skeptical. It seems like it's going to be a lot of bother, ongoing bother. But we can have planning and zoning look at that if we want to. And those are my main comments.
Anyone else? Councilmember Nason?
Yeah, two things that I'd want us to consider, and one would be Chief Geisberger's perspective. I think that you know, the question has come up about the differences between Albany and Berkeley. I think that we have, in recent years, the council and the police department have enjoyed a very constructive relationship, and that is not always true in cities between electeds and the police. And I think it's important that we respect. We don't have to agree with everything the police department might say or want, but I think that it is incumbent on us to hear their perspective before doing something that could have a significant impact on their work. As far as taxes, I'm not an enthusiast for basing our policy direction on tax revenue with something as far as changing the law, a regulatory law which is intended to protect people and neighborhoods solely for tax reasons. The tax reason that I would see here from looking at this regional context on local taxes, it looks to me like what really may be needed is a tax-free cannabis, medical cannabis access. That would be, that's what I see when I look at this as the public need. And it troubles me a little bit that in many jurisdictions, medical cannabis is not being given a break. The other piece of it is if Albany wants to compete in the tax farming kind of aspect of this, I think that with respect to competition with Berkeley, you know, it sounds like what you guys are looking for is more like the Seven Stars model, which is a place that's a little bit isolated from neighborhoods, not all that close to other commercial and so forth. And
is that the place upstairs in the 99 Ranch Mall? Is that the one?
Not anymore. It's now on Pierce Street. It's the same business, I think, but it's got a storefront on the west side of Pierce Street. And I encourage people to go down there. It's, you know, you see some of the, you know, that it's quite well run, but you also see the social aspect of it. But what I was going to say is if Albany wants to compete with Berkeley, it's one thing if it wants to compete for taxes with Seven Stars. I think it's a very different question if it wants to compete with Berkeley's cannabis industry, which has gone to on-site vaping and on-site smoking. I see that as potentially much more problematical, although in terms of that social impact that I'm describing, I think that would be very much of concern, and it's also very much ties into the taxation question, because if we're trying to compete with Berkeley, then we have to consider that we may need to go down the same road in order to stay in that competition. So all in all, my inclination would be to defer this until we've had a chance to talk with Chief Geisberger. And I think that if the goal is something like 7 stars, everybody here should probably go on down there a few times and get a sense of whether you think that would be a good fit for Albany.
Okay.
Vice Mayor?
All right, so if we're going to, well, first of all, I agree with Councilmember Nason that we shouldn't move on until we've talked to the chief a little bit more. But if we are going to move on, I would certainly like there to be research, as Michael gave us some information about health risks and brain development, especially in our youth. And I'd like to have somebody do more research on quality control. Once it's in our city being sold, do we really know what we're getting? We last year banned flavored tobacco with the idea that we were trying to, sort of send the message to people that we valued our kids and this was really dangerous for them, and we didn't really want to provide them the means to do this. And now we're looking at marijuana, and I look at the strategic plan section on supporting public health and safety, and we talk about supporting hospital services, prohibiting flavored tobacco. We have the sugar sweetened beverage tax. We're doing a lot of work with our most vulnerable populations, and now we're going to do cannabis. And to me, that's like we're all moving sort of in one nice, healthy way down the street, and then we're doing this sort of sidebar over here. And to me, it just doesn't fit really well. And my other concern about this is we talk about it could be on Eastshore, it could be by the freeway, it could be away from the city. We're building a housing development down there. What message are we sending to the people that are going to live down there? That you're the part of town that we'll put our dispensary in? I mean, if this is such a good business, why are we hiding it? I think we really need to evaluate if we're going to do it, why is it not something that we're encouraging to become part of the Solano Avenue Association and the Chamber of Commerce? Why are we hiding it way down there? So I think all of those things, to me, need to be discussed before we move forward.
So you mind if I speak to some of these items? Sure. Okay. So I agree. I think such a business should be welcome on Solano Avenue and be part of the, if it was successful, be part of the Solano Avenue Association and the Chamber. I don't necessarily need to hide it, but that was a consideration. Where it's placed was a consideration to be thought of if we are going forward and people had concerns about it being close to schools, et cetera. That is what other cities do. They do have limits. Usually it's not anything near what we had first proposed way back in whatever it was, 2006. But it's usually a few hundred feet these days is what cities propose as
setbacks.
Setbacks. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the right word. It's not height limits. It's width limits. Distances from the business. Yeah, I don't know about the 7 stars model. The business I know is the Berkeley Patients Group. I think it is on San Pablo Avenue. I think it's near Dwight.
That's an on-site consumption business.
That I am not sure of. That's a business I have been in several times. It's a business model that I like because it looks like a grocery store. There's parking. But in fact, it's better than a grocery store, better than a liquor store. You're carded on the outside. You enter. It's professionally set up. You're helped by people. And I I have been there recently, did not notice on-site consumption, but I'm not sure that that's
It's a new
okay.
regulation in Berkeley. Yeah.
It's Berkeley Patients Group or something like that, BPG, I believe. So yeah, I think this is a revenue. This is about revenue. You know, January 1st, 2017, when this came along, when this was made illegal, whatever January 1st it was, it happened and the world did not end. In fact, I can't detect any change in how law enforcement has had to act in that time. As Councilmember Moss pointed out, the businesses are very careful and usually have quite a bit of private security in order to alleviate the need for, in order to address that question of the police getting involved with these businesses. They know they don't want that reputation. They know it would be bad for that reputation, and that's my experience. Is that we don't have this. We don't have, as in the first days of dispensaries in Oakland, where you saw potential areas of crime around these dispensaries. I think we're seeing something very different these days, which is these are very up-and-up businesses. I think we do need to always consider revenue. My preliminary discussions with staff are that we have to pay out $1.8 million or so in PERS funds, going up to over $5 million in 2030. We have revenue to make up for, and there's an old saying, count your pennies and the dollars will take care of themselves, and I think in Albany we do need to count our pennies. We have so few opportunities for businesses, we do not need to shut out any businesses. I do think the chief should be consulted, absolutely. As I mentioned, that was my intention. The vice mayor asked, what message are we sending? Well, I think we're sending the message that all of our surrounding communities are allowing this and are in tune up the 880 and 80 corridor, except for Albany. We are the outlier, and frankly, I think it makes us look behind the times. I think that both alcohol and cannabis have health problems, and yet what do we have on our most important corner in the city? A liquor store, and a block away, another liquor store. And as far as I know, police are spending a lot more time at liquor store robberies than they are at cannabis dispensaries. They certainly, neither are substances should be used wantonly, but I don't consider one necessarily worse than the other, especially if we keep it away from the children. I do think hiring hiring a consultant would be a good idea. In my mind, if we had all the time in the world, we would have the experts here, we'd have the doctors, we'd have the people who've implemented this in other cities, we'd have all the data in front of you. This is just kind of preliminary, and if we have to come back with that, I would be happy to. I love the idea of tax-free medical cannabis. I think that's awesome. Why I don't think there is sales tax on medical items. Why should there be on cannabis if it's
that troubles me very much to see that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we could set the we could show the way. We could be a we could do the right thing in this case. And being specific about what we want to explore, sure, absolutely. I think that there's pros and cons with all the various things that we could do. At the end of the day, I don't want to be out of tune with my other cities that are enjoying the revenue from these businesses. I want to welcome these businesses, and I want them to be businesses that work well with our community. And I think we would be saying that we are in tune with our neighbors if we do so. Councilmember Moss?
Okay, so just taking a couple of notes, listening to everybody's ideas. You know, I think the idea of reaching out to youth, to parents, you know, talking about potential harmful effects for youth in cannabis is a great idea. And if we were to proceed with this, I'd be very much an advocate of saying, let's take some of that money, whatever comes out of that, and put it into a public health message that we're putting out there. But I don't see that if we permit this, that we're permitting something that's going to be directly going to youth. It's not. I mean, that's not the way these laws are working. The setbacks that you mentioned of 1,000 feet, setbacks are something that will determine if we go ahead with this. If we, and setbacks can be as much as 1,000 feet in some communities, as small as 250 feet in a place like Emeryville, which is very small. You know, I don't know who we're competing with. Maybe we're coming up with a completely different model, whether that's not neither 7-star or on-site cannabis use in Berkeley. The promoter that Nick and I talked to at one point said, "Oh, we could do something where we didn't allow vaping." Well, that would be different. Maybe we could put it, if we were to go ahead with this, we could say, we're not going to allow vaping in Albany, or at least in a for sale situation. What else do I have here? Quality control. Well, that would be one thing, is get rid of anything artificial like that, like vaping. Nick mentioned this idea that we have liquor stores here. I think it's often been pretty well shown that societal problems around alcohol seem to be greater at this point than around cannabis. We also get a lot of revenues from gambling, and although not as much as we used to, but it's not like have a purity test here in Albany in terms of our revenue stream is coming from. You know, this debate about Solano Avenue, San Pablo Avenue, or maybe down by the Target, you know, that's a discussion that I think planning and zoning could have, and that they probably should. And then this idea of tax-free medical marijuana, I think that might be a great idea. That would, again, make us different than, you know, Berkeley or Richmond or and some of the other communities. And finally, I think there's only 45 municipalities, I heard the other day, in California that are allowing this. And they seem to be mostly concentrated. If you look at that list, there's a big chunk of the 45 right there. It mostly seems to be around here. And some of these other cities are not allowing it. But we're part of the Bay Area. We're not like, I don't know, a Modesto or some of these other communities. So I don't think we need to be that much different on this. And again, what motivated me initially was this looks like there's a lot of revenue here, which I think the city could use.
If we do tax-free, which sounds like an interesting idea at least, where's our revenue?
Well, tax-free medical.
Tax-free medical. If we did that, where's our revenue?
On that, well, there's still a 15% state tax. So what these taxes up there, like 5% in Berkeley, 5%, you know, et cetera, those are tacked on to the 15% state tax. And then, you know, and then because if we did allow this, we would be getting some of that revenue back, because as I understand it now, we do not get any of the state sales tax on cannabis.
We'd also be getting tax on sales of recreational marijuana.
Yeah, right.
And
if we
on
allowed
site, if
manufacturing
we're
or
going to have
distribution.
vaping or smoking or eating or whatever on site, that would be an additional
Right.
tax
And, you know, like I say,
resource.
You know, we could decide as a community, you know, the planning and zoning can make recommendations as to how much, or if any, of this we want to allow. But, you know, my recommendation from at least as much as I was able to check out in the last few weeks is we should consider this. I think we're making a mistake not to.
I just want to make a comment on the medical marijuana issue. That used to be a real distinction before recreational was allowed, but even then, you could drive down Highway 101 in Sonoma County where they allowed billboards, and there'd be these big billboards saying, have anxiety, you need a medical marijuana prescription. Here's a 1-800 number. Call this number and you can get one on the phone. So this idea that medical marijuana was really all about medical use was never true. And I think once recreational became legal, I suspect whatever infrastructure we had to deal with medical marijuana needs legitimately just went poof. And we'd have to try to reconstruct that again somehow. And I just don't think that would be real possible. Although I think there really is a fairness issue there. I know people who were on chemo and, upstanding citizens with ovarian cancer or whatever, and they said it really helped. I have no doubt about that. So, where do we go from here?
Well, what I've heard is that the council desires us to speak to the chief at least before they would consider this. But it would be good to hear that if any of the council members were in favor, if you had certain things that you felt were non-starters or certain things you felt you would do if you did this, it'd be good to hear them now as well. We can certainly bring this back after speaking with the chief.
Well, the issue I thought was whether or not we were going to send this down to P&Z. Do we have any idea whether or not P&Z is currently interested in spending the time on this? It's been since July.
I think if it's something that the council provides direction to do and you're fairly specific, it's something that we could take back to them.
Is that really the question? I mean, do we ask each body if they're interested in considering a matter we send to them?
Well, it matters to me, but the question here is, do we want to keep it at the council level or do we want to send it to P&Z? We started at the start as though we were going to send it to P&Z, and now it seems more like this is morphed into we're going to keep it at the council level. So I think that decision needs to be made.
Well, what I heard was that it wouldn't move forward at the council until we had talked with the chief. And
Yeah,
so that was a necessary next step is what I'm...
That seems key. I think that two things I'd love to hear from the subcommittee would be, well, I'd like Chief Geisberger to come and talk with us in open session. The other thing is I'd like to see the committee kind of take a look at the local cannabis scene, take a look at Berkeley and Richmond, the ones that are closest to Albany, and see what is going on. I would be very reluctant to see Albany playing a pioneering role on the on-site smoking and vaping and creating cannabis lounges and so forth. I would call that a non-starter, at least now. I think that we need to see what is happening with that in other cities before we put that on the table. But I would urge the committee to go out and take a look at the places that are currently serving people who live in Albany and think about what we're trying to achieve with this, in terms of that we're talking about a business that needs to be competitive. What are we saying? We're going to offer something very convenient for people in Albany. It seems like it's already very convenient. What are you trying to offer, have the city host that there is some kind of need for, or that there would be some tax generation for, which I'm not in favor. I'm in favor of doing this if we decide it's the best thing for the community. I'm not in favor of doing it just for the tax revenue. I think that that's a mistake to look at it that way.
Okay, I heard on-site as a non-starter. Any other direction you want to give the subcommittee?
No, I think I've said what I want to say. I don't think it's a good idea, so I don't want to give you direction, but I know I'm in a minority here, so. But I definitely want you to speak with the chief and have him come here and speak.
Okay.
And let me just say one more thing. I think Rochelle was really right here, that we need to understand what we're trying to do. And I think at least she and I agree that simply having a program to generate revenue is not really, I'm not trying to speak for you, but it's not really what we're looking at. So what is the purpose of this? And I think that I'd like to hear that answer.
Sure.
Not
Well, to me,
necessarily now.
it's about not shutting out a particular type of business. As Councilmember Mosh points out, we don't shut out gambling. We don't shut out liquor sales. So why would we shut out this business, in my mind? It's part of it.
Well, that's the classic, two wrongs don't make a right argument. How about legalizing heroin? I mean, just think how much tax money we could get from that. We could have legalized shooting clinics.
Heroin is not legal. We're talking about a substance that's been legalized by the state of California. So,
Okay, yeah, we need to move on. It's getting late, so I think that we will come back with given directions from our other council members with more information, and thank you for the time. So, moving along, next item of business is, well, that was any other subcommittee reports? If not, we should move on to appointed representation reports.
I'll just say that my Housing Authority report's attached.
Thank you. Is there anything you wanted to highlight in that?
No, I don't think so. It's kind of a summary of some of the activities of the Housing Authority that you may not realize they do.
Okay.
And I wrote it so long ago, I don't remember what it says.
Thank you. Councilmember Nason, anything? Councilmember Barnes. Moss. Councilmember Moss. Okay, I've got a long list, but I'll try to keep it short. We did have a polling meeting, but I think that was right before the last council meeting. We gave directions to the pollsters and staff. I attended the Alt Debates Task Force with the Vice Mayor. The council members ought to know that jurisdictions are being asked for money to fund activities of the task force, outreach activities. We're being asked for $5,000. I haven't brought this to the council yet because one of the reasons is that I didn't see any commitment from the other jurisdictions that are being asked yet. So no one else has stepped up, and I'm not sure that I want us to be the first.
I'm sorry, who's asking for this money again?
The Alt Debates Task Force. They're asking for the money to promote, how would you put it, Vice Mayor?
For outreach to save Alt Debates, basically.
Yeah, for outreach. Yeah, to let people know what's happening with Alt Debates. I attended the East Bay Community Energy meeting where it was all about the PCIA, which, and unfortunately, that looks like that's going to go up again and might go up significantly enough that East Bay Community Energy has to decide on whether or not to change some of its rates. We're not there yet, but the staff, in its wisdom, brought that before us very early on so that we can consider that. And we don't even know what their PCIA will be, but it's expected that it will go up.
Did you vote on nuclear power?
No, nuclear power did not come up in that meeting, and I believe it is expected to come up in March or April. I met with Councilmember Rigel Robinson of Berkeley. I attended a Waste Management Authority meeting. We had a presentation about the Altamont property. They own property in Altamont where there's some wind farms and other tenants, and that property is owned in case there's requirements for a future landfill. So we learned about that, and we learned that there's a zero waste conference coming up, and the recycling board has openings for professionals involved in the recycling industry. I attended a East Bay Community Energy Subcommittee meeting, getting updates on marketing and legislation activities. I attended Alameda County Transportation Commission, and the big item there was a big push for a bus lane on the bridge. a dedicated bus lane on the Bay Bridge on one deck is the word I'm looking for, just one of the decks. And I believe it's going westbound. So there's a number of electeds who are pushing this heavily. The staff is very skeptical. I attended the pancake breakfast at the senior center along with at least Vice Mayor and maybe other, and Councilmember Nason. And I finally I'm on to non-appointed meetings. Well, I'll finish out the non-appointed meetings. I attended the New Year's celebration that the Tibetan community had in Richmond called Losar. And anyone else have community meetings?
I have a couple. One is the park. I attended the Park Advisory Committee for the East Bay Regional Park District, and there's one piece of important news, which is that they are planning a grand opening for the Bay Trail in Albany. Right now, the date is tentatively set for April 25th. So that's exciting for us.
Is that a week?
Pardon?
April 25th, is that a...
It's a Sunday, I believe, or it's either a Saturday, might be a Saturday. It's the day of, I think it's intended to be the day of the Earth Day cleanup at the Albany beach. But in fact, this year, the Albany and Wildcat cleanups are being held on different days. So it turns out it's not the day of the Earth Day beach cleanup. So I have a feeling the date might be reconsidered. And I'll keep everyone posted. Yeah, on Saturday.
Will that also be the grand opening of the completed bike trail across the parking lot?
Yes, it would be the grand opening for the bike trail.
Okay.
Yeah, and the other thing, I met with Rashi Kasarwani, who represents District 1 in Berkeley, which is the district immediately adjacent to Cordonices Creek. We met to discuss the Caltrans list of sites for potential rental, which there is one in Albany that's been identified by Caltrans, and there is in Berkeley the issue of the so-called eyebrows at the foot of University across from the Seabreeze Market.
Any other community meetings or other meetings of note?
Yes, last Monday I attended the Youth and Government meeting to promote what happened this evening. I had 5 minutes to kind of talk it up, and we got a pretty good number of kids to come out. It was very successful. So.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you for that. And Vice Mayor.
I met last week with almost all of my advisory body appointees. We meet once a year to kind of check in with each other. I attended the police department fraud protection discussion at Belmont Village, and the mayor and I met with Senator Skinner and other elected officials on Friday to talk about some bills that she has and perhaps some bills we'd like her to have, and had a good conversation.
Yeah, thank you for remembering that. I also met with the Mayor of Berkeley, Jesse Arreguin. Anything else? If not, I think the next item is the city council meetings and events, although it's just an empty item here. Well, I guess that's the item we just did. Next is city manager report. Nicole?
Thank you, Mayor. I have kind of a long list, but I'm going to try and go fast with respect to time here. We received information from the prospective developer that was interested in the private property on Albany Hill, Truemark Homes. You may recall there was a study session with Planning and Zoning Commission. The developer has indicated that they will not be continuing with the prospective project at this time. I'd also like to pencil in with the council that we will provide a discussion item on options for updating Measure K. As you recall, Measure K restricts or manages development on private property on the Hill, and we'll look at how we can better address possible changes, as we've heard from our community, a strong interest in doing so. The San Pablo Avenue specific plan is kicking off soon. We have a website that I'd like to show you here. It's sanpablospecificplan.org, and this will be the host site for all of the information and resources collected during that planning process. The kickoff meeting will be held on March 30th at the Community Center, time yet to be determined, but it will be in the evening. Let's see. The police department did an excellent presentation, as usual, over at Belmont Village, just next door, on elder abuse and fraud prevention. I'd really like to acknowledge the work of Detective Lara for his continued efforts in this field. They're extremely well received, both in the city and countywide. The police department has also been actively enforcing our flavored tobacco and minimum pack sizes for tobacco at our local vending facilities, so you may see them out and about. It's an active engagement with those businesses. I appreciate the work they're doing there, in addition to everything else they manage. Public Works, as always, is extremely busy and waiting here tonight to present to you on another topic. Albany Hill is just about done, so please take some time to go up there and look at the fantastic improvements. The work will be done hopefully by the end of the week, with just a few minor to-dos and some cleanup after that. The fire department, as mentioned, had a great support to the pancake breakfast, and thank them for their continued support of that event. And the Red Cross blood drive was already mentioned, so please join us for that, which is coming up tomorrow. Two other items really quickly. We had a really great turnout, as usual, for our Bollywood dance party. These are a really fun event that the rec department puts on, and is a great turnout from the community for this particular event. You see in our e-news that we have updates on coronavirus, and we will continue to do this, as mentioned by the mayor, in coordination with the County Environmental Health, Department of Public Health. And one other thing on here, if you missed, well, of course, I can't skip over the Film Fest. You see those handouts here on the dais as well in the back of the room. Please join us. This event is coming up. It's our 10th annual. It's been going on for that long, and it's that well loved, so please join us for that event. And lastly, if you missed the recycling workshop, this is a great way to just plug in and figure out, can I recycle this or not? So take a look at this clip, and it can really help guide you through those questions that you may have at odd hours of the evening. That's it, thanks.
Great, thank you for that. And moving on to presentations, we have a pavement management presentation. And staff, would you take it away, please?
Yes, thank you, council members. Today we'll be talking about the pavement management program. We'll give you an extensive update on what we've been doing over the past year and a half and how that dovetails into our CIP project. Pavement is one of the city's largest and most visible assets. We invest, I think right now our budget is $8.6 million for the foreseeable, for the remainder of the CIP program. So we want to make sure we're thoughtful and strategic about how we're investing all that money and whether that's enough, whether we need to reallocate it. So we spent a good amount of time looking at several different scenarios to make sure we're giving you a very thoughtful strategic plan on this. The diagram behind you shows the different steps that we've taken over the past 18 months. We're not going to go through all of them tonight. We're going to start with implementation, but I'm going to review some of the other items that we have covered in the past. The first one is, along with the goals and objectives are obviously to improve our city's pavement thoughtfully in a cost-effective manner, keeping in mind that we want growth across all different types of pavement categories. So from local roads to arterials, our large roads that connect to the freeway, and then also our residential roads. To begin with, the database is an important factor in this that kind of grounds all of our information. So the database contains all the factual information about how many lane miles we have, how many overall miles we have, what categorizations they have, what type of usage that is based on, all of those good informations to build our decisions on. The condition assessment is one that we have to do on a regular basis. We're always looking at condition, how it changes, how it degrades over time. Every 2 years we do a PTAP, which updates all of that information with actually a physical presence on the ground, walking around, actually looking at our physical inventory and then updating that into the database so that our decisions are based on the most recent information. So all of that information was presented to Traffic and Safety last summer, last spring, and we brought them up to speed on this. So all of their feedback has been provided to us, and we want to give you the same information. Let's see. So in terms of implementation, what we're going to be talking about is the different factors that we took, looking at the condition assessment, looking at the database, all the factors that came into our decision-making process about recommending a pavement management strategy going forward from here. So we look at things like city priorities. What does it mean to establish a city priority in terms of a bicycle network? How much do we want to invest in repaving the bicycle network versus other local roads? How much do we want to invest in arterials versus collectors? How much do we want to invest in Solano or some other streets? So strategically thinking about how all of those things come together. We do know that other utilities come into our city and also impact our streets. So East Bay Mud has a very aggressive pipeline replacement program we've already been given a list of streets that they're going to impact for the next maybe year, 12 to 18 months. And that will continue. So that's a continuing conversation. PG&E is in our backyard all the time with gas main replacements. So getting information about all of those other things impacts how we decide we're going to spend our money and how we time some of those paving projects. Other constraints are obviously resource constraints. We want to be thoughtful about putting together one big package every year so that staff can efficiently get through one big design package and one big construction package each year. We want to be thoughtful about our treatments. So to be cost effective, we pick streets that have similar levels of use, similar levels of degradation, and we package those together so that we could have one treatment that crosses the whole city. So last summer we did a slurry seal for several different streets that had similar degradation issues, and we did a slurry seal to essentially maintain what we thought were streets that were in good condition and to keep them in good condition. So this next one will have a different project objective, and then we'll also do a different project objective in 2 years, and then we'll kind of go through that same cycle again. So we'll talk about the paving CIP and how this dovetails into there, and then I'll wrap up with some performance monitoring. So let me see if I got a couple more things here. Before we talk about implementation, I do want to make sure we cover functional class. So functional class is where we look at how the street is used. So typically we look at traffic volume, whether it's a bus route, whether it's a truck route. This will put a street into different classifications based on those factors. So arterial is the most highly used. Collectors are second. Residential and other are those smaller streets, those local streets, those residential streets. Albany is a residential city. Half of our streets are either in the residential class and other class. So let me cover what other means to make sure we're clear on this. But before I do that, I'll just be clear that Jenny Van Dyke, who is here with NCE, and I'm going to be handing off to her. We went through a good amount of review of the existing functional classes that were in the Street Saver database from 2 years ago. And we compared that to the city's general plan. We compared that to the city's existing ATP program. We found a lot of discrepancies. So with traffic and safety, with Jenny's help, we made a lot of corrections to what we thought was a fairly accurate street saver database with classifications, and we brought those up to speed so they better reflected our use and what we thought were priorities, specifically on the bike network and specifically on some of the arterials that we thought were being underutilized but maybe weighted incorrectly in the database. So we made a lot of those adjustments. We think it's a much tighter, more accurate reflection of our street network the way we're using it today. The functional classifications, I mentioned the other category, so I'll hit that here. If you look at the lane miles, arterials, we have about 10 miles of lane miles. Collectors, we've got about 12. Between residential other, that's 35 miles. So that's a good representation of our city streets is in the residential and other category. Others, we chose the other category as a new category that we would designate for residential streets that are used heavily by bicyclists. So that's typically something that is on our bicycle network. We wanted to separate that out to make sure that we were measuring that separately and that that can have a different treatment. So if you're on a residential street and you're driving along, if you're in a car, that's one experience that you have. But when you're on a bicycle, that's a very different and distinct experience. We thought that in some cases we might have a different treatment for the other category. So to separate those out, to cost those out, to understand if we wanted to treat it differently and put a higher priority on it, either as a higher PCI or just a different treatment that would either last longer or feel different as a cyclist, you can do that with the other category. So we have 11 miles in the bicycle network that we can evaluate those costs and benefits to the cycling community. So as a total, that's 58 miles, and that's kind of the summary of what our bike network, our road network looks like. So I'm going to hand it over to Jenny. She deserves a lot of our appreciation here. She's run through several different scenarios where we asked her to look at very different budgetary scenarios so that we could kind of flesh out what made sense for traffic and safety to look at. And we presented a lot of different scenarios to them so that we would have an idea of not just different levels of PCI that we would see after a 5-year program or after a 10-year program. So you'll see some of those, but also how we're investing through different categories between arterials, collectors, residential streets, and others. So with that, thank you, Jenny, and I'll hand it off to you.
Good evening, council members and mayor. Thank you for having me this evening. Again, I'm going to help describe some of the budget scenarios that we ran for the city with a lot of direction from traffic and safety and also from city staff. And this slide highlights some of the elements that we considered. These are some of the variables in the budget scenarios that we ran in the city's PMP program, software, Street Saver, and some of those variables that we wanted to consider to make sure we got reach the objectives that the city staff were looking for. Included weighting factors, which prioritize which functional classifications are more important to make sure that the money goes towards those types of streets. Budget allocation, how can we use the funds and target certain functional classifications or certain streets based on those priorities. And then treatment adjustments, which Robert alluded to about the adjustment primarily that was made was for those residential streets that are on bike routes and prioritizing going from a more cost-effective Cape Seal treatment, which is less expensive, but an overlay that's more desirable to those bicycle users. And then the result of that is improving over the next 10 years in these budget scenarios. We'll see improving the PCI or the condition index value of all of these streets and doing it with some equity between the functional classifications. So Robert was speaking to a little bit earlier, the sort of the series of events in implementing this paving CIP program includes some of these items that we show here, which are local priorities such as existing CIP projects such as the Washington Avenue Reconstruction Project, the Solano Avenue Complete Streets Project, and any ATP improvements. Other factors include utility work, which he also mentioned, and the city's sewer rehab program, and plugging those sorts of things in so we can understand what factors we also need to consider when planning out a multi-year program. And then on top of that, there's the street saver funding scenarios, which I'll go into a little bit more detail here next, and taking the output from those budget scenarios that we develop in the street saver program, and then taking the output and customizing it to either aggregate the street list by treatment and proximity, because otherwise it's sort of this shotgun approach of what street saver recommends you can treat at certain times in certain years. But we have to take that data and really review it carefully and complete a field review as well to verify the treatment, and then also make sure that it makes sense packaging the streets and their treatments to make a more cost-effective program. And then following that goes the next step before construction would be investigation and design, primarily a pavement design, any utility review, and the civil design before we can get off to bidding and construction. So this is something that's used in the Street Saver program, which is a PCI listing, which the index goes from, PCI stands for Pavement Condition Index. Index goes from 0 to 100. 0 is a failed street. 100 would be a newly paved street. When we started our analysis with the city in 2018, the number we were looking at was 53, which is in the at-risk condition category, which means that the network's PCI was at risk of falling into a poor condition. So next I'll go through some of the budget scenarios we went through with the city staff. There were 3 that we looked at together. The first one being what are the existing secured funds over the next 5 years? And the following 2 were more targeted budget scenarios, where let's target a PCI of 75, which would get the city into a good condition category, and then let's go all the way up to 85 to see what would it take to get the city in a very good condition. And these are some of the results that we came up with and the necessary funding to get there. So the orange line on the bottom shows the existing estimated funding level over the next 10 years at $1.5 million per year. So back in 2018, like I said, the assumed PCI was around 53. And over the next couple of years, after the city's 2019 surface seal program and the work plan for 2020, that PCI is expected to jump into the low 60s, which actually you can see has been verified. Progress is being made after the city's recent PTAP report, which inspected all of the city streets last summer. So that projection was on target with what the city's PTAP report came up with, and also is in the same ballpark as what the MTC's website is showing on its vital signs report, which it estimated at one point in time being 57 for the year 2020. So I rely a lot more on the city's recent PTAP report being most up to date as far as the estimated PCI for the network. So with that said, again, the bottom line is, or I'm sorry, the orange line, I should say, is the projected values if we maintain the existing secured funds at $1.5 million per year over the next 10 years. So that would raise the city's overall network PCI to a 67, which is certainly an improvement and can tackle quite a few streets that are in need of maintenance. However, with a 23% or so increase in the annual budget, that can get the city up to a PCI of 75, which is a lot more stable. Because at 67, there's still some risk of trying to continually keep up with those streets that are continuing to fall into poor shape. And I'll show some additional pie charts that kind of illustrate how that looks over 10 years. The last the last budget scenario that we ran was roughly a 50% increase on the existing funding level to get the city all the way up to a PCI of 85, which is a very admirable goal to reach, but it does take quite a bit more money to get there. And so this table just gives a breakdown of the pavement condition index by functional classification over comparing it with the initial year and then 10 years later after those funding scenarios that I just described. So, like I said, back in 2018, the estimated PCI was around 53, and you can tell by the categories that we looked at, collectors were suffering the most out of that group, and the functional class other, which Robert described being those residential streets that have bike routes on them, those were actually in relatively better shape than the other functional classifications. And so, as you can see in the latter three columns in the table, the current funding scenario would help the network jump into the high 60s, with each functional classification being within 5 points of each other. That was one of our goals when running these budget scenarios, is to help each functional class jump into better conditions rather than just kind of letting Street Saver dictate where each of the money would be driven to, and that ended up with some disparities in the condition between the different functional classifications. Then the latter two columns, with reaching further into better condition, you can see it gets into the 70s and then into the 80s by functional classification. And again, this is the difference on average per year, the additional funding that would be needed to reach those goals, those targets in blue and green, of another $400,000 in funding each year, and then another $900,000 in funding each year to reach those goals.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Could you go back to that slide?
Certainly.
So if you went to improving to 77% or 77 in the 10 years, would it be reasonable to assume at that funding rate that perhaps in 15 years you would be at the 86? Does it work that way? It keeps going up?
Not necessarily. There tends to be some plateaus because as you've made some gains, we'd have to kind of project that. I can't speak to it very accurately without running the analysis, but it's not a guarantee. I mean, it certainly helps to maintain that, and that's something that if city staff wants to recommend that, or council, that is something that we can look at to see how long that sustained progress would continue, or if it would be sustained, I should say.
Yeah, on that note, I know, can you go back to your graph with the lines?
Yes.
As you go from 60, if you look on the far right end where the graph ends, is the number 67, 75, 85. There's no diminishing marginal returns. You know, that if you keep, so to get from 67 to 75, you spend an extra $400,000. To get from 75 to 85, you spend an extra $600,000. But it's sort of linear. You know, is there a point of diminishing returns where if we tried to get it up to 95,
there is a
maximum, spend a lot more money?
I'm sorry, say that last statement again.
Let's say you added another line there that for 95, hypothetically, would it just take like another 500 or 600K a year to get up to 95? Or do you reach a point of diminishing returns where you have to start spending way more money to get up to 95?
I think what's kind of nuanced about pavement management is there is a point where if you start spending money on streets that are already in great condition, it's not a very good use of your funds. So to even reach for a 95, for instance, there are actually parameters in the Street Saver modeling system that give you a cap, because at one point or another, usually 85 or 90 is used as a cap, where Street Saver recommends that, and it's user defined, you can define it however you want, but at some point, you know, if you have a street that's got a PCI of 90, if you're trying to reach a target of 95, that means all of your streets are practically brand new. And so the point of paving a street is so you pave it once and then you don't have to go back to it for 5, 10 years, 15 in some cases too. So you allow the PCI to drop to somewhere that's, comfortable without letting it age and deteriorate too far to let maintenance go out the window. But to reach a 95, to answer your question, I think there is a plateau where, or a maximum where Street Saver recommends that you just wait. You let things fall a little bit before you go ahead and treat them again.
So a practical upper bound would be 85?
Certainly, yes. It is a nice target, and to be at 85. And so these are some pie charts just to illustrate some of the other results, which this, breaking down the PCI, this lets us see what the condition categories are, how much of the network by area is in those various condition categories that I highlighted earlier. So the current condition in late 2018 showed less than half the streets in good condition, which is the green colors, and more than half of the city streets being in those fair, at-risk, or poor condition categories. And based on the current funding levels, it does look promising, which means that about 3/4 of the network would get to be into the good or very good condition categories, which are those streets that are easy to maintain, and the city would want to focus on reducing those in the red and orange categories, which can start to happen with your scenarios 2 and 3, where we're reaching for a 75 PCI and an 85 PCI. Really decreasing that piece of the pie. So after looking at those budget scenarios, what we focused on was the current level funding and the streets that Street Saver recommended for treatment, and aggregating them and taking a look at the treatment options that were recommended. And the idea was, because the city had already done a program in 2019, a surface seal program, those slurry seals that Robert had mentioned, the idea was to now focus on overlays and reconstruction. And so what we ended up finding was, based on the city's planned 2-year budget, it was a $5.2 million budget for the next 2 years, the idea is to begin next year and then the following. This would cover 4 miles of streets. This is half of the list. 4 miles of streets, half of which are arterials or collectors, your higher volume streets. The other half would be your more local, lower volume streets. And this list also includes the Washington Avenue Reconstruction Project, which is in design right now. Let's see if I wanted to highlight anything else. So again, this list is kind of midway through that implementation flow chart that I showed earlier. So this has been field verified as far as what we did was we went out to each of these streets, took a look at what Street Saver recommended after we migrated the streets together, and then we looked at them in person to see if we agreed with what Street Saver was at least recommending, so just from a visual standpoint. And here's a map just to give you kind of a visual look from an aerial view here, and the distribution that we looked at, and linking a lot of these sections together, since, as like I said, with Street Saver, would have output you would have seen a lot of really short lines sitting out there in the map. So we took time to kind of craft a more well thought out list. And so, as the legend says, the Reconstruction candidates are there in red. And then the overlay candidates are there in blue and distributed throughout the city. So just some details on the past and proposed paving CIP program for the city. The assumed budget for the 5-year CIP was $8.6 million, which includes this $5.2 million 2-year plan. In 2019, the city did a slurry seal program across 20 streets throughout the city. It also completed its PTAP evaluation in the summer, and then we updated the city CIP criteria that Robert went through earlier. And then in 2020, the Washington Avenue Reconstruction project will occur, and then also begin the design of year 1 of the 2-year program. And in 2021, next year, the plan will be to construct year 1 of this 2-year program and then begin design of year 2. And then the following year, begin to develop the next 2-year street list. I'll let Robert take the next few slides. Thanks.
So the scenarios we've gone through so far, we talked about the existing CIP. We talked about a scenario that would bring us to a PCI of 75 and another one that would bring us a PCI of 85. So I wanted to highlight kind of the push and pull of selecting some of those scenarios. So the approved budget for the 5-year CIP, which you guys approved in 2017, is shown on the left here, which is I'm summarizing here, but these are funding that is available for local streets and roads. So these are regional fundings that are included in Measure B, local streets and roads, Measure BB, local streets and roads, vehicle registration fees, gas tax, Measure F, and SB1. So that's a lot. It's like a good salad mixture of funding sources that are given to us with some discretion. So in the past, what we've chosen to do and what I've shown here is that we've taken some of that discretionary funding and allocated it towards bike and ped projects. So on the left side, we show roughly about $2 million in the prior CIP of bike and ped projects that we are implementing currently. So if we choose a different funding scenario for local streets and roads that would push us up into the $1.9 or $2 million per year, some of that money may need to come from bike and ped projects on the discretionary side. Measure B and Measure BB have allocated specific percentages for bike and ped, but we've chosen to go over and above that into the local streets and roads category and allocate additional funding on top of those that are mandated by B and BB. So we've been very proactive about investing our resources into our bike and ped projects. So those are crossings, those are ATP striping. Those are the beacons that are going to go in later this year. Those are street-wide traffic calming measures. So all of those things are funded at least in part by these local measures, and some of that is discretionary so that we could accelerate some of those improvements. So that's kind of the give and take. What we're proposing, and what you'll see in the CIP is actually showing that $1.9 million in spending. So if that's something, we just want to share that with you, that's kind of the direction that Traffic and Safety has shared with us. That commission thought that was a prudent and thoughtful direction to go into, is investing some of that money, knowing that we want to get to a PCI of in the 75 range in that 10-year time frame. Does that make sense? So let's go on to the next.
I'm sorry, can you say it again?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So streets and roads are an amalgam of multiple funding sources. The one that's local to Albany is Measure F. So Measure F invests in storm drains and streets, and we've been primarily focusing on streets, investing in those. So along with Measure F, we take regional funding, Measure B, Measure BB, state funding, vehicle registration fees, gas tax, and SB1. So all of those can be used together to fund local streets and roads rehabilitation programs. So that's what we used last year for the Slurry Seal program. That's what we're going to use for Washington and going forward. So if you look back at the CIP, all of those will be listed. All of those funding sources will be listed under street rehabilitation.
But Measure F for storm drains, I assume that's not cutting into funding we need to meet our obligations under the consent.
It's not. No, we've got another funding source dedicated to that.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's not cutting into any of our obligations to meet our footage requirements for the sewer program. Mark wants to make sure I get this right.
Yeah, so we have wastewater fees that cover all the consent decree work. That's both the operating costs as well as the capital improvements.
Okay, so we don't use Measure F
No,
for that?
no, the Measure F is specifically for storm drains and pavement. In most cases, you upgrade the storm drains when you do the pavement, so they're really connected.
Okay.
How long does Measure F last?
I don't think there's an end date. I think it's a
perpetuity?
In perpetuity, and I think it includes a CPI adjustment annually.
So the left column here is the approved CIP from I think it was 2017 when we voted on that. So that has an allocation of the funding sources that we're talking about. We have an approval for some fraction of that going to bike and ped, and the remainder of that, the bulk of that, going to street rehabilitation. So that would get us to the high 60s. That's the 67 PCI in 10 years. If we were to reallocate some of that money but keep the same funding level, we would have to move money from bike and ped into the paving category. So some of those bike and ped projects would be delayed, or they would be rescoped, or they would be reevaluated. And then that money would be invested in streets and roads to get to the 1.9 million.
Which would be 75, a PCI of 75. So we're looking at PCI 67 on the left and PCI of 75 on the right.
That's right.
Did we reallocate when we passed the sidewalk tax, since that goes to 100% to PED?
I don't believe we did. We still had available funds in the other locations, and we wanted to spend all of that with that backlog of issues we had on sidewalks. So we spent more than the annual allocation for sidewalks, and we used the money we had already committed for sidewalks prior to that.
Question. So some local street improvements, or improvements to local streets, benefits motor vehicles and bicyclists. So I'm unsure if this graph takes that into account. For example, is the reduction on the right just things specific to bike and ped and don't benefit motor vehicles, or how did you?
So I separated out everything that had some sort of bike and ped element to it. So for example, the ATP striping, we performed the ATP striping work with the same contractor that did the slurry seals. So we gave them the sheets for construction, and they put the striping on after they slurry sealed. That's a very clear and distinct benefit to bike and ped that we could separate out from streets. So if I weren't to do that, I would not have given them any of those ATP improvement drawings, and they would have just put down the striping that's on the street now. So Jenny showed the map earlier, and Marin Avenue is one of the streets that we're looking at for 2 years from now. Or Washington is another example. Washington is in design now. Some of those sheets have bike and ped elements. Right? We've got stencils and so forth.
So, okay, so it sounds like it's things specifically for bike and ped that you're proposing reducing, but repaving a street which would benefit any skater or bicyclist as well as a motor vehicle, that's just included in paving.
Correct.
Not specifically called out for bike. Okay.
Correct. So in terms of performance monitoring, this is something that we want to do on a regular basis. We want to see how we're doing, want to evaluate, kind of check the pulse, and then go back to work. So the field work from 2019 was PTAP related. So that is funded primarily by MTC with a local match. They sent out a team to look at Albany's street index, and so that was done in 2019. The final report just got delivered last month to us, so we're happy to share that. And it does confirm that the current street index is still in the at-risk category, but it's up to 60 now. So we see some gains, and we expect to see more with the investments that we have on deck. The next application for PTAP will be in 2021, and that's for arterials and collectors. Those tend to get more wear and tear. There's higher volume, there's higher bus volume, so they'll do that for us in 2021. The annual report, as I mentioned, has some highlights. The PCI is in 60. The street maintenance was reflected, so the overlay project, the slurry seal project that we did last summer, is reflected in those numbers in the PTAP. And then changes to street conditions, those categorical changes are reflected in the new database and the PTAP report. So the PTAP is a nice reference because you could look at your street, you could look at your neighbor's street, you can see exactly what the PCI is from Solano down to the city border, or from Cleveland up to El Cerrito or Richmond. So there's lots of different ways you can look at that and gather good localized information. So that we can make that available on the website. And let's see. So in summary, we've upgraded the program to treat 5.6 miles of bike routes on residential streets. So that's in the proposed budget. The current funding levels, we think, is getting us from an at-risk category to a fair category and to a PCI of 67 in 10 years. With 23% more spending, we think we can get the PCI up to 75. So that's all of the information that came out of Jenny's work from last year. So we think that's the level of additional investment we would need. So the next steps we would present. Jenny mentioned this before. We took the Washington Avenue design to Traffic and Safety last week. We got feedback from them. We're going on to the next steps in finalizing that design. That'll be put in front of you guys for advertising and bid in April. We're expecting that construction in the June to August timeframe. So Washington Avenue is going to be taken down by 6 inches and then rebuilt from the bottom up. And then for 2021, we're implementing. We're going to recommend implementation of a $1.9 million CIP program that you'll see later on today. So we're just kicking off the CIP process. That'll be something that you guys see later in the spring, in the May-June timeframe. So we'll be presenting that, and you'll see the $1.9 million in the CIP program. So, questions?
Let me kick it off. Where do you want to be? Do you want to be at 67? Do you want to be at 75? Do you want to be at 80, 85? Where do you want to be?
Do you want to start?
Well, through this, we didn't necessarily look at where an endpoint. What we wanted to do is lay out options that sort of bound what we thought was realistic. So our current funding level gets us marginal gains. We think an 85 spending level is somewhat aggressive for us. It might eat into other things. We felt that getting up to the mid-70s where was reasonable, both in terms of money that we have to spend, but also staff resources to actually execute the projects, because one of the issues is we have to execute year in, year out for this to be effective. It's the same way with the sewer side. So, we need to get to a point where we're designing our next year project this year and start that rolling thing, because in reality these are 2-year projects to design and construct. So there's a couple of things. I don't think we had an endpoint. We want to be as high as we can, taking into the factors of funding as well as staff resources to execute projects.
Okay, you want to be as high as you can, but I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, what does it look like if we were to reach 67 and maintain it? What would that look like? What would that feel like? What would 75, what would 85 look like, feel like? Would people be happy with 67? Would people be happy with 75?
I'll say the 85 number came out in some of the ACTC meetings, it's Dublin always has the highest PCI up at 85. So we said that's sort of a high water mark of where we think we would be, and then again getting all the functional classes into a good category would seem reasonable, where you wouldn't see, you'd really reduce the amount of deteriorated streets. So there would still be issues, but it wouldn't be so pronounced.
I also am interested in knowing, maintaining 67, say you reach 67 and you want to maintain that, how much does that cost every year? Maintaining 75, how much does that cost every year? Maintaining 85, how much does that cost every year once you hit that number?
Yeah, we could do that analysis. I think, Jenny, that's something we can do.
And I just, why I hopped up was I wanted to kind of describe how does a 67 network feel? How does a 75 network feel? And if you can imagine those roads that it's a pretty smooth ride, there's no potholes in the way, and feeling that throughout 3/4 of your network, or even more of your network, that's what 67 feels like. And then 75 feels like, I don't even really notice those pothole streets anymore, those streets that are really bumpy, that you drive over here and there throughout your network now. So if you think about your network now, which you guys should be pretty familiar with, is there are potholes, throughout over 1/3 of your network. So there's there's a good handful of poor condition streets. So those are the streets that have a PCI of less than 50. So the remaining life, as they put it in Street Saver, of those streets is diminishing quickly. And so the higher the PCI that the city can get, a lot easier it's going to be to maintain. So if you can, I'm sure if we were to put those numbers together, to maintain the condition of a higher network, of a higher condition network, to maintain that takes a little bit less money, because you've already made the big investment to get up to that condition. So you're keeping those streets from dropping down into that poor condition category by maintaining them at a good pace after you reach your goal. But again, we can go through the numbers and kind of illustrate that more clearly.
Okay. All right, I'll stop there. Let my other council members ask questions. Pete, are you?
A couple of things occurred to me. One, I would have loved to have seen this in the packet, this whole presentation. It's a lot easier for me to kind of take it in if I get a little preview of it before I see it, because it's a lot of data, and it's not something I'm particularly easy for me to digest. But that said, one thing I think about when we're upgrading to something like that 85 level or a much higher level, a friend of mine once called potholes negative speed bumps. Is there ever been any correlation between faster traffic on streets that are really well paved? Does it actually make it less safe on some level?
From experience, I don't think so.
I don't know. I don't think so. Robert, you might.
Maybe more vehicle damage.
Well, yeah, Jenny's comment was maybe more vehicle damage. The challenge with allowing potholes and thinking of that as a strategy for reducing traffic speeds is that you're continually degrading a street until you get down to a point where you have to completely rehabilitate it. So we get lots of negative comments about that strategy currently, so I wouldn't want to continue that. So I think that I see your point that there's some upside benefit, even though it might be sparse. But long term, to develop the network, we really just want to do the investments we're supposed to.
Okay, so that was probably as much rhetorical as anything, but what was my other idea? My other thought was, looking forward as to why these streets will, go down. How much thought it was given to what the effect of bus lanes on San Pablo Avenue are likely to be on some of these side streets? I know this is not going to happen overnight. This is still in the talking stage. But if the county and Transportation Commission actually starts to put these bus lane only things on San Pablo Avenue. My sense is that cars will be going on some of the other streets. And is that anticipated or thought about it?
I mean, I think once there's, so this is about a dedicated bus lane on.
Yeah, dedicated bus lanes.
Well, I think that won't necessarily change the way that street is looked at least from this high-level planning level, because San Pablo Avenue, for instance, is already an arterial street, so it's already kind of got the highest weighting factor to it as far as selection goes.
Right. So the question in my mind, is this going to affect the rest of our streets?
Oh, I see. The
Yeah, I
impacts.
mean, how will this, will we get more traffic on, if not necessarily Cambridge, but some of the other streets that people might cut off to get off of San Pablo Avenue?
I'm not a traffic engineer, but I would say that, if traffic patterns could change once you dedicate a lane of San Pablo Avenue to a bus lane, and that can change traffic patterns. And then one thing that may happen is, probably a traffic study and some traffic counts would have to be performed to see what the effects are. And then you take those results and then do planning, revise your planning and criteria from there, and those functional classifications that we mentioned earlier.
So I add one thing. I think the way we have this program structured, we would capture that because we'd be doing the PTAP reports that actually go out and do surveys. They would notice that decay of the streets. Because I think what you're saying is that changes on San Pablo Avenue would push traffic onto the local streets. It may not be enough to change the functional class, but it increase the traffic load. So I think we would do those sort of check-ins where we do the PTAP report and survey, and we would see that faster decay. And I think that's where it would be captured.
Okay. But you must model traffic flows in here somewhere, right? Because more traffic means faster pavement deterioration.
Yeah, part of what Justin Freed did for us last year was when he was looking at the classifications between categories, he went back to the general plan and actually looked at existing traffic counts to verify what looked like low volume streets relative to higher volume streets, all the way up to the San Pablos and the Buchanans and the Marins at the highest volume counts. We don't do that every year, but he looked at all of the historical information that we have.
Quick question, what's the possibility of getting more money?
Well, I think a number of our funding sources are fixed, the pass-through funds. So I think there would have to be some sort of a ballot initiative, I suspect, to increase the tax rate on Measure F.
If we were to do that, do you have the bandwidth to do that?
Well, I think staffing to execute projects is a limiting factor for a lot of the things that we do. So more money now doesn't necessarily help us, but being able to structure all of our work in a way that we can execute with some level of certainty every year is I think, where we get the most gains.
I would also add that last summer we taxed the citizens of Albany pretty well because we had Solano closed down for a sewer rehab for 4 weeks, I believe. At the same time, East Bay Mud had a project going, and we had our slurry seal project going, which covered, Jenny's mentioned, 20 streets. So there is a limited capacity for us to actually take streets out of service. Next summer this summer we'll be taking Marin out of service for a sewer project. Following that, during that same time frame, we'll be taking Washington Avenue out of commission to rehabilitate that. I'm not saying the whole summer will be out of commission, but we're stretching the limits of what is feasible in terms of what our road network can handle. So again, it's the same message. Increasing it now doesn't necessarily mean getting to 75 faster. We have some funds to spend down first.
By the way, the slurry sealing you did on my street, it really worked pretty well. It's much better.
Councilmember Nason, you had some questions?
Yeah, I do. First, I want to say thank you. It's really, this is immensely helpful information and eases the concern, a concern that some of us have been carrying for a while, that, you know, being below 60, just the idea that, you know, the current direction would take us to 67 is a very, very encouraging good news. The getting up into the 70s sounds like a very desirable outcome, but I look at the looking at that pie chart, I see that it leaves some more than 10% of our road network still in at risk, poor or very poor, almost 10% just in that very poor category, and I'm curious why that would be.
I think, I mean, there's always some targets that you can kind of reassess if you have another goal, which is to lessen the, really target those streets that are in worse condition. You have to keep in mind that it's a lot more expensive to treat them. So what we did was, as I said earlier in one of the slides, which was we did PCI targets. We wanted to see general improvements throughout each functional classification. So that still does leave some street segments behind that you want to get to later, which, as you can see, another $500,000 a year can get you. So it kind of depends on how you want to target your spending. If you really want to target those roads that are in the worst shape, that is one approach. It does come at a sacrifice for other streets that you want to maintain in good shape. So there's, it is a chunk of the pie that is tough to target, but depending on the objectives set by the city, those can be targeted differently.
Yeah, it could be possible to accept a higher percentage of good rather than very good and shoot for a lower percentage of the very poor or failed.
Sure.
Yeah, okay.
Can I add one more thing on that? I think one of the things you struggle with too is when you make an investment into a road, you want to make sure you're doing the maintenance work, and that would be slurry sealing on certain, if you make intervals. So if you spend too much on getting your very poor up to very good, you risk that some of the things that are street segments that are in the at risk drop down to the poor, and you really never catch up. So the thing is to make sure that you need to make sure that you're spending enough to keep the gains that you get by investing in your streets, the ones you bring up to a higher level.
Yeah, and if we do become more dense, as I think we all believe and even hope will occur, we will have more pressure as well. Okay, thank you.
I do see one member of the public still here, I believe. Yeah, does that member of the public wish to speak on this item? Okay, thank you. So we
quick question.
Bring it back to the council, and over to you, Councilmember Barnes.
Yeah, so you're talking about a triage strategy, basically. So there's sort of, to put it crudely, there's streets that are going to die anyway, and you don't want to spend a lot of money on streets that are going to die anyway when you can save some streets that are still savable?
Yeah, so what we did on this is, if you would let Street Saver just pick the most optimal piece, you would get a class of roads that never get any upgrades, which we didn't think was right. So what we did is forced it to spend equally across all functional classes. Not equally, but we wanted the gains in functional class to close the gap in PCI across the functional classes, so they're within 5%. So we think over the long term, the wedge of very, very poor or failed streets would reduce.
So this is an informational item only, according to the staff, according to the agenda. So you're not requiring any input from us at this point, but I assume these decisions might come back to us in the budget process, or maybe in an agenda item later?
Yeah, that's correct. It'll come through the CIP process.
CIP process, okay, great. Okay, well, thank you very much for that, and thank you for the printout. But I would like to emphasize Councilmember Moss's concern that we didn't have this beforehand, but I understand we will be posting this on the agenda later for the public and for us. So thank for the electronic copy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to, we have two more substantive items, public hearing and unfinished business. Public hearing 10-1 is the ordinance renaming the Traffic and Safety Commission to Transportation Commission, first reading. We did previously review this and give some direction, and I believe that staff has come back considering that direction. And take it away, Jeff.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You're correct, and I'll be brief given the time here. This is a code section that currently on the books dates back to the late 1950s and is really not a practical guide to how the commission functions today. The Traffic and Safety Commission reviewed this draft ordinance last summer, and their recommendations were incorporated into the drafts that you've reviewed first on November 4th, where you, the primary comment back had some concerns about an appeal process that was incorporated into that draft. At that point in time, we didn't really have at this point in time, we don't have the commission doing the types of actions that would necessitate an appeal process, like planning and zoning has to have one. So the revised draft that's before you this evening is essentially the same except for the elimination of the appeal process. The commission would continue to serve in its function that's required by MTC as the city's active transportation advisory committee, which in MTC language is the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee. So this is before you this evening for first reading. Be happy to answer any additional questions.
Any questions from council members?
I have a comment, it's a comment, not a question.
Okay. Any questions at this time from council members? Seeing none, would the public like to comment? No. Bringing it back to council. Go ahead with your comment, Vice Mayor.
On page 2, 2-20.1, the purpose, the transportation will strive to take into consideration mobility, safety, sustainability, accessibility, and equity. I would like to remove the word strive and change it to will take into consideration. I think we should do it, not try to do it. And also, on the next page where the duties, it goes to E, I would like to add F, and I'd like to change it to duties and responsibilities, and then add F, view all of the above through accessible and equity lenses.
Okay, the first change was on page
2. Actually, I think it's between 22 and 23, line 22, 23.
Page 2.
Page 2, under purpose.
Okay. Will strive, okay.
Remove the word strive.
Got it.
And say will take into consideration.
Okay, does everyone have that? All my council members follow that one? Okay. The next one,
Next
you'll
one.
have to explain in one more.
Okay, it's duties, so it's 2-20.2. The duties, first of all, I would change it to duties and responsibilities. And then I would add an F, which would be like line 20 on the next page. View all of the above through accessible and equity lenses.
I think I like that myself, but the language strikes me, lenses doesn't strike me as municipal language somehow. I mean, the sentiment I absolutely agree with.
Okay, is there a better word? I'm happy to have a different word, I just don't know what you would like.
I would say that'd probably be something more like the commission will consider accessibility and equity in all of the above duties and responsibilities. I don't know, I'm not very good at this either.
You're the worst. You're the one, come on.
Kind of brain dead at this hour of the night. I'm usually in bed by now.
The other thing we could do with the city manager, correct me, and city attorney, could we recommend the sentiment and then for the second reading approve the wording?
Great idea.
All right.
Yeah.
Let's do that then. If the rest of the council is okay with the sentiment.
I'm fine with that.
All right. Sounds like we have an agreement with that. So,
On a motion?
yes, please.
I'll move we introduce for first reading ordinance 2020-02, renaming the Traffic and Safety Commission to the Transportation Commission with the 2 changes recommended.
Second.
Roll, please.
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor McQuaid?
Yes.
Mayor Pilch?
Yes.
And the motion passes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Takes care of public hearing, item 10.1. Final item 11, unfinished business encroachment permit for improvements in the public right-of-way. And is this you as well, Jeff?
Yes, it is.
Okay, then take it away. When you're ready.
I'll just leave it there. So the action before the City Council is a consideration of an approval of an encroachment permit to allow fence improvements in the public right-of-way at 1085 Eastshore Highway. This is the last piece of property in Albany before reaching the City of Berkeley border. In recent years, the council has addressed encroachments like this, such as fencing, stairs, and retaining walls into the public right-of-way. These encroachments typically don't affect the current function of the city-owned right-of-way, and historically have not been particularly well documented, if at all. Our current practice, however, is to bring these encroachment permits that involve permanent improvements into the City Council for review. This item was originally scheduled for consideration on November 18th, and at that time the council asked for a continuance of the item to gather additional information. This fence came about, and just to get everyone oriented here, oh, thank you. This is Cordnese's Creek right here, the city limit line between Albany and Berkeley, and the area that we're talking about is adjacent to the Wilanco property. And I'll zoom in a little bit here. To kind of give you a quick, get you oriented real quickly, this is the back side of the Target store in the upper right. This is the Wilanco property. I believe that's an auto repair shop, body shop. This property down here is located in the city of Berkeley. This is public storage. And then these parcels over here are portions of the city of Berkeley transfer facility that runs all the way down to Gilman. And then this small sliver right here is a East Bay Mud property that incorporates their interceptor sewer line. The issue, this came about due to the existence of a significant homeless encampments. And in late 2019, the city of Berkeley authorized Public Storage to install a fence that connected from their maintenance facility around this cul-de-sac at the end of 2nd Street to around the public, this portion, this private property, to secure the public storage property and connect it up to Eastshore Highway. Public Storage also placed a fence along the Eastshore Highway heading south to basically go all the way around their building, where there were also some significant encampments. The issue is, for the city of Albany, is relatively limited. There's a small segment highlighted in the yellow circle there, which is a segment that's located within the jurisdiction of the city of Albany. And this is a Google Earth image before the fence went in. The challenge was, if this fence could be installed entirely on on private property, there are no city regulations to prevent it. But there is the head wall of the culvert right here that carries the flow of Cornices Creek underneath the Eastshore Highway, underneath the freeway, and over towards Golden Gate Fields. In order to get around that head wall, the fence did need to encroach into the city's public right-of-way and then connect back to the chain link fence that is around the auto repair facility. And this is another angle. So again, the fence comes along here, encroaches in the right-of-way, and then cuts back. The actual installation of the fence has been completed. It was completed without permits from the city of Albany late in December. And the action now is to legalize the installation of the fence after the fact. This is, I think, recognized by everyone as a step in order to maintain some security and stability for the creek environment and for the surrounding private property owners. These encampments, this image is not necessarily the worst condition that was out there in terms of a homeless encampment. And it was creating issues for both police departments and concerns certainly by Public Storage, who had a couple of encampment fires immediately up against their building. Right now, the image you're looking at this is all private property. It's either the Willanco property or Public Storage. And with the completion of the fence, basically this segment of the creek from the Eastshore Highway to the Union Pacific tracks is fenced off. On the Albany side of the creek, this chain link fence connects further on to the east towards Target, which also is fenced off.
And that's been there a long time, right? That fence isn't new.
The Target fence?
Right.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I assume that went in, I wasn't here, but I assume it went in when the construction of the Target started.
And this one here with the sign on it, that's been there a long time too, right?
I believe so, yes. With respect to the future of the creek, I know the council are strong advocates for the protection of the waterway and the ecology and public access. This is not intended to preclude future protections and enhancements in public access to the creek. It's really to stabilize an existing situation that the city of Berkeley was spending a lot of money, and along with the private property owners doing these cleanups, and to be able to stabilize the situation, keep the debris out of the creek, was a decision that they felt strongly about, and our piece of it, if removed, would leave open the chance for the reestablishment of encampments or other trespassing in the area. Again, these two properties that are immediately adjacent to Eastshore Highway are private property, and so we do have concerns.
Could I ask you to go back one photo, or two actually, to the, yeah. I believe Councilmember Nason mentioned shade trees that had been destroyed. Can one of you identify which ones those were? Or if you know?
Yes. And you've seen, this is the picture of the one. Did everybody get the pictures I sent around?
I think so, yeah.
That's the picture. So. It's hard to tell one tree from another in this picture, but it's the ones in that area, that right next to, right next to the south side.
Near Eastshore.
Yes, it
Okay.
fell into Eastshore. So
Okay.
it fell onto this tent and out into Eastshore.
Okay, all right, thank you. Here, sure, thank you. Okay, was that it for your presentation?
And yes, I know Councilmember Nason had some questions. I could respond to that if you'd like me to, or if Councilmember Nason would like me to.
Well, you did send an email response, but that was late in the day today, I think, or maybe not late in the day, but sometime during the day today. I don't know if everyone got a chance to see that.
Just a quick question. How long in feet is the encroachment? Is it 10 or 15 feet?
It's roughly probably the whole segment within the jurisdiction of the city of Albany is 75 feet. Probably about 60 feet of that would be within city right-of-way where we require this encroachment permit. The piece of it that's on private property wouldn't be subject to this kind of a permit process.
Okay, thank you. Council member questions?
Is there an application for a permit, or is this a staff proposal?
There will be an application. It would be a quite simple application where the contractor who installed the fence would need to come in, fill out the basic information of who they are, and attach this image, or there's also a site plan that shows the fence, and that would essentially be it. So it's a very simple over-the-counter permit. It's not the kind of permit that we typically take in and review for a couple of weeks and go back and forth with people. It's an over-the-counter process.
But there is a waiver of liability provision by the owner of the encroachment, saying that they will assume liability, that they will agree to attorney's fees in the case of a dispute, and so forth. So wouldn't that be part of the application process?
Yes, that's part of our form now.
But you want us to approve the permit before we get that?
Technically, you're authorizing us to approve the permit. This is a ministerial permit. This normally approved by
so
staff.
Okay, so you'll receive the permit before it gets approved?
Yeah.
The application for the permit?
The permit application is filled out, it's signed by the applicant, and then we sign it. It's the same, ends up being the same piece of paper.
Okay.
So are you saying, of course, the applicant, there is no applicant, no one, before the construction, of course, no one applied for the encroachment permit. Are you intending then to reach out to the contractor to tell them they need to come in and apply for that permit?
Yes, they knew they needed to do it beforehand, and they didn't.
Okay.
For whatever reason, I'm not going to speculate about that.
Okay. And when you said they knew because they should have...
They had been informed that
They've been informed?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
Kind of a philosophical question. Why would we not do this? I mean, it's kind of...
It's the nature of the construction business sometimes. I didn't notice this until the first day or two in January. I don't know when it was constructed. It could have been that they did it while we were closed down. Or sometimes the people who are actually working there don't understand the nuances and the...
I'm sorry, I guess I wasn't clear on my question. Why would we not approve the permit? Not why did they not ask for one, but...
This would be normally something that I think we would recommend that you do approve it. It is not, as far as security fences go, it's pretty good looking, but it's really not a very good looking fence. But it has to be of a certain security ability to withstand some vandalism.
Well, wouldn't a straightforward answer be because the council doesn't approve it's being there?
That would be the best answer, yes.
If they had applied for the permit when you'd ask them, would this have come to us anyway?
Yes.
What does Friends of Five Creek think about all this?
I think to summarize, they sent you a letter earlier, and I apologize that wasn't part of the initial packet. They had some concerns that this would set a precedent that this segment of creek would be not available for future public access.
All I can say was after the Berkeley Hills Road Race, I had volunteered for that, and we had some cones and stuff that they store in that storage space down there. The scene down there was horrific. I mean, it was like, so I think, you weigh that against the loss of temporarily the public access, and I think that's a reasonable trade-off.
So I want to make sure that the public didn't, okay. Back to council. Any other questions? Comments?
I've been deeply involved in this site for quite a while, I was deeply concerned about the homeless encampment on that site. It was immediately life-threatening. There were fires inside one particular tent, and I circulated a copy of a picture that shows the burn hole in the top of that tent. Now, that tent was located in Berkeley. I believe it was the same individual who ended up in the burn unit in San Francisco after a similar tent fire in over by the Eyebrows in Berkeley. So that took place in Berkeley. But the tree that fell on the tent occurred in Albany. So I felt that the danger of that site to the people living in it was our concern here in Albany, as well as a concern for Berkeley. In addition, Cordnices Creek is a shared resource in which these government entities and the state have invested enormous amounts of money, and this is the terminal point of the watershed. So it was of great concern that the environmental circumstances were so severe. Having said that, to this day, I do not know, and nobody seems to know, why the Berkeley police could not have prevented the encampment from taking hold. This is not a Martin versus Boise type issue. It's private property, and trespassing is against the law, and ordinarily police can prevent it from happening. I do understand that the Albany police did not realize that the tent under the failing tree was actually in Albany. I think that it was general understanding that the creek marked the boundary between the cities when, in fact, it did not. So there were a series of problems that resulted in an horrific situation. And so it was certainly wonderful news when Berkeley kind of accelerated and got the encampment resolved. But it was something of a shock then to see the fence go up, because this is a trail that has been open to the public for as long as anyone knows, presumably since the founding of Albany, but certainly at least of people who know the history of the area say at least 40 years that stretch has been open to the public.
Well,
Yeah.
Where would the trail be? It would be along that fence line?
Yeah. The trail is from here to here. And it has,
Berkeley side.
yes. Well, it starts in Albany, but it quickly goes to the Berkeley side and finishes at 2nd Street. And note, there is not a sidewalk along Eastshore Highway on either side. So it's a valuable connector between Eastshore Highway and 2nd Street. It's also an access to the creek itself. And the importance of that, and the reason that loss of that public access is a concern, is that creek maintenance is very labor intensive. It also requires expertise. And the way we try to maintain our creeks is primarily through the use of volunteers who are supervised by experts. And that is basically the Friends of Five Creeks model. So we are losing the maintenance, the potential to maintain the creek. We've lost shade trees, which are very important for creeks to be shaded, especially on their southern exposure, because you rapidly warm up the water, and that's not good for the creatures in the creek. So there's just a variety of problems. It's very unfortunate. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do this, because if Berkeley really lacks the ability to protect private property, then you just can't have people burning themselves and the buildings around them. But from an Albany perspective, I would like to see us make an attempt, at least, to work with the landowner to encourage a consideration in the future of restoring the public access to the creek.
Well, so it's access, the path was along private property in Berkeley, it sounds like.
Partly in Albany and partly in Berkeley. Yeah, the beginning of it was in Albany, but the end of it was, most of it is certainly in Berkeley.
Okay. You can call it a de facto public path, but I think it was a path on private land.
It was a path on private land, and even if it was, in fact, in use as a path for 110 years, they still have the right to block it. The public apparently does not acquire an easement even after 100 years, because the policy is not to punish people for allowing public access. So they shouldn't lose their rights because they provide public access. So again, I'm not saying we shouldn't approve this permit. My preference would be to see us write a letter to the landowner saying, you know, you should be aware of these, of the considerations about creek maintenance, the need for trees to shade the creek, and whatever might be said to try to get some good creek maintenance going.
That might be great, a great letter to come from yourself.
Well, I'm more than happy to do that, but
by yourself and perhaps approved by the council.
Okay, I would be very glad to do that.
Yes, Vice Mayor.
So I'm thinking about, somewhere in there I read that the fire department has a key and can get in case of an emergency. Perhaps if we choose to send a letter, there could be some kind of an agreement. I mean, obviously there's a fence, but you can get through it. That the property owner may want to work with Friends of Five Creeks for some targeted maintenance at certain times and allow them in.
For a fee, yeah. I don't think you could have a 501c3 organization working on private land just to work on private land.
But if he invited them in, they could.
It would be a little bit problematical if the public doesn't have access and asking volunteers to come in and do work that is the responsibility of a private landowner is a little sketchy.
So then let me understand this better then. Who would be doing, if the fence wasn't there and we lived in a perfect world, who would be doing the creek maintenance?
I think that we would be trying to have, with the homeless encampment gone, particularly when the next stretch of the creek becomes a public access area with interpretive, all that is planned at considerable public expense, that we would have a continuous area that could be worked on by Friends of Five Creeks or other. Albany sometimes organizes Creek Days. You could have different volunteers out there doing that entire stretch.
Who's done it in the past? Has anybody over the last 100 years done it?
That I don't know. I do know that for the last year and a half, it's been a homeless encampment.
Right. I'm just trying to figure out how this has worked before all of this part happened.
Well, before all this happened, I think, and before even now, with the transfer station still unbuilt, this stretch of the creek has been severely neglected. This is the stretch from the railroad tracks to the Eastshore Highway.
Okay.
So the hour is getting late. I just want to ask a question about permitting and fees and fines. Do we have any, it looks like there is a fee for this encroachment permit, but it looks like there would be no fine for not having done it and coming in and doing it retroactively. Is that the case?
No, we do have a process where if someone starts work without a permit, the fee is doubled.
Okay, and so the fee for this would be doubled then?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, that's good to know, because I think that if we didn't have that, it would be problematic to allow people to just retroactively come and pull permits.
Mr. Mayor, can I move to extend till 10:45?
Yes, so moved. Any objections? Seeing none, continue on. So if the item
yes.
The item before us then is simply to authorize staff, which staff is bringing to us as a courtesy because our approval is not required, but to authorize staff to approve this permit then.
But what I'd like to suggest as an alternative is what you said before, that I would work with Mr. Bond to prepare a letter to Elanco, laying out what the benefits of public access and keeping people working on the stream and encouraging them to consider this fence a temporary measure, but offering to inviting them to apply for a permit.
I thought it's public storage that was the southern
correct
building, but in Elanco's northern.
Yes.
So since the path was on the public storage property mostly, why Elanco?
Well, Elanco is the host of the fence. Elanco that's the portion of the fence that is in Albany. But the problem cannot be fixed, and the reason I'm supporting this, I'm supporting getting eventually to legalizing the fence, is that the removal of the Albany portion cannot restore a path. There isn't enough room on the Albany side of the creek for a path to extend the entire way. But what I would like to see is the owner encouraged to consider this a temporary measure and to be prepared to engage in creek maintenance and potentially work in the future towards a restoration of public access and maintenance. And I think all it requires is a letter to Elanco, and a letter could invite them to apply for an encroachment permit.
Sure. So I would recommend that we take whatever action we want on the permit, but that the letter be brought back as another item for the council to approve at a later date.
But would the letter go before or after the permit? That would be the question.
Would it matter to you?
Yes, I think it's kind of pointless to send a letter after the fact.
I'm totally confused.
I see. So you want to send a letter before the permit is approved?
Yes, pointing out the obligations that the obligations that are now solely on this landowner, the things that need to be done to keep the creek in good condition.
But he's not required to do those kind of things. There's nothing there's no law in Albany or state or anything that I'm aware of that says a landowner, it's his responsibility to keep a certain ecological level on a creek or position or a waterway like this. I mean, you can't pollute things, but I don't know that you have the responsibility to actually keep it in good shape, particularly since it isn't in good shape now.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
you're sort of pleading with this guy or the owners of the private property owners of either side to do this. So, it seems to me we could approve the encroachment permit tonight. I think you could start a kind of a public pressure of a letter that says, please consider this, maybe going down there and talking with the owners to see where they're at. But I don't think you have we can't force them to do that.
well, we can't force them not to do certain things. And when Mr. Bond and I were there, we saw someone doing something very illegal, bringing in some overburden from a digging project. It wasn't the Albany landowner. It was coming from the contractor for public storage, came over and dumped overburden from a construction, project onto the bank of the creek. The goal here is not to do something regulatory. They should have a permit for the fence because Berkeley cannot protect private property for whatever reason. But I think that there should be communication from Albany to the Albany landowner encouraging care for the creek and also encouraging them to consider express the city's interest in someday restoring future access so that that is at least known to them.
Who owns the creek? Does the private property owner actually own the creek?
Yes.
Okay. Is that the only place that's owned by private?
Most of the Cordonices Creek in Albany is privately owned. It's the individual houses going upstream.
Okay.
Given what that scene looked like, my preference would be to, legalize what is already in place. And then, if I was that landowner, I would just go, and then let's wait a couple of months just to make sure an encampment doesn't come back, that there's some other issues that don't crop up, for him to get a letter from us at this point to say, oh, now we want you to take care of the creek. I think I would sort of let all this situation calm down for a couple of months first before we go back and start suggesting things. Because I just think if I was that lender, I'd still be really nervous, and I would not sort of want to mess up what's already there and already been repaired and done. So I'm fine within, we're talking about long-term anyway, so I don't see why we can't let this whole situation settle down and look at it again in a few months or a year.
I'm fine with sending a letter. I think my preference is to see the letter before the council again first, though, before it's sent. But I think in order to wrap this up, in order to move this along, can I just ask for someone to make a motion that we can vote on?
I will move that the council authorize Mr. Bond and myself to prepare a letter to Willanco for the council's review at its next meeting.
Yeah.
but not improve the encroachment permit?
That's not part of the motion.
We don't even have an application for an encroachment permit, so I don't think that's really an issue. We could consider the encroachment permit application and the letter, hopefully, at the same meeting.
No, the
Which would be our
encroachment
next
permit is
meeting.
agendized. It's 11-1.
Pardon?
That's the item we're acting on, is the encroachment permit. It's what's agendized. I don't see why we can't follow the staff recommendation and legalize the fence and then deal with the letter as soon as the council wants to. I prefer later, but I'm happy if you want to do it earlier.
You know, the staff can, there is no requirement for the council to do anything, right? There is no, although our current encroachment application says the city council must approve, that's not the fact. There is no such provision in the code. So they can grant a permit at any time.
Let's do this. Let's vote on motions, and if the city attorney considers our actions problematic, please do speak up. But we do have a motion.
There's no second.
And there's no second yet. I'm not hearing any second. Do I have a second?
So I would move the staff recommendation.
Okay, well, hold on. I just have to formally say, so that motion dies, and your motion, please.
That the council adopt resolution 2020-24 granting approval of an encroachment permit for 1085 East Shore Highway to allow fencing on a city-owned right-of-way in accordance with section 14.2, use of right-of-way of the Albany Municipal Code.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion?
Well, I'm thinking about this letter. I think it's not a bad idea to send an encouraging letter. Would you be interested in making that part of your motion?
I think we're just making this unnecessarily complicated. The fence is already there. Let's just legalize it, and then we can send a letter or not. What motivation is there? I don't see how the letter motivates anything vis-a-vis the fence that's already there.
Well, I think the letter encourages long-term behavior, and it can be a separate motion. I was just curious if you wanted to add it in.
No, I don't really want to. I'm happy to vote on a separate motion, though.
Okay, so any further discussion on this motion then? Seeing none, would you poll the council, please?
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Nason?
Yes.
Vice Mayor McQuaid?
Yes.
Mayor Pilch?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, do I have any other motions at this time?
Not from me.
Okay. I'm happy to consider a letter at a future, for an agenda item at a future council meeting.
No, I don't think that's in the cards.
Okay, well then, looks like we're done with this item. Thank you. And that is the last item of business, except for future agenda items and the note of city meetings and events. Does anyone have future agenda items? If not,
Measure M, just wanted to remind, it would be good to not lose track of the fact that we do want to have an expenditure plan for Measure M.
Measure M.
That was our parks maintenance.
Okay, and is that something you're working with the city manager on already, or no?
I think it's down the road after the CAFRs.
Okay, all right, great, thanks. Well, then the meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.